I think we're on.
Sorry, guys, I didn't realize that we were up and running. I was just looking into a couple of different translation things. We're going to start off with, I think the passages we're going to go through tonight are a little bit more cryptic than some of the ones we've gone through previous. So I think that's gonna be interesting, and I'm curious where that ends up going. But hey, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Victory Never Sleeps. This is part 4 now of our going through the Hávamál. We're really taking our time, so I know this is going a little bit more episodes than we planned, but I think it's very good, and I've gotten really good feedback on it so far. People seem to be enjoying it, and I get a lot out of it, and I'm certainly enjoying going through it. I get something new out of it every time I go through it, so I think it's certainly a useful endeavor. Top of the show stuff, please make sure you're liking, sharing, and subscribing wherever you're hearing this or watching this. Get those algorithms up. It helps us get the message out there to folks that might be interested in seeing it. Also, yeah, I think that's what I got, but I'd like to plug Ostara at Thorshof that's coming up very soon. Less than a month from now, and Nick can put that link up for us, but it's coming up very soon at Thorshof in Linden, North Carolina. It's hard to believe that we're already marches upon us tomorrow morning, so we're getting there quick. But no, it's going to be great. I am looking forward to seeing folks there. I'm very excited about the event. If you haven't been to Thorshof, it's beautiful, it's powerful, and it's a really special place. So yeah, we would love to see you guys there coming up March 22nd through the 24th. If you can get a hold of your local folk builder, then get y'all set up, and yeah, we'd love to see you there. I think that's all we've got at the top of the show, and we're kind of ready to dive in. Before we do, Nick, if you could post up a link for folks who want to follow along with the Bellows translation of the Havamal. That's what Svan and I will be going through, and we've got a handy website we've been using. Appreciate you throwing up the link there. If anybody wants to go and get situated, we're going to be starting on stanza 79. Feel free to follow along in whatever version you have handy, wherever you're watching this. If you want to follow along in a different translation, that's fine. Honestly, I think that's kind of cool. Maybe you'll get a little bit something extra or different out of it. It's always informative to see the different ways stuff's translated. If anybody wants to donate tonight, we've got the fancy bells and whistles to do that in the description of this video. We really appreciate it. Last week, Go Through Rob Stam did a matching deal to where he raised quite a bit of money for us. We appreciate that. But you guys were all very generous last week, and that makes a big difference. So thank you for it. I already see Ronald Blake, our ever stalwart donator, has donated $50 to our folk services campaign that we're doing right now to help out a member. Thank you very much for that, Ronald. It's much appreciated. And with that, Svan, let's jump right into this kind of cryptic first stanza for tonight.
Yeah, so I was trying to link the gap that is present in the English version, and I haven't been able to complete it just yet. But here we are. So where we're gonna go with what we got. mainly the usage of certain words here. In particular, the part that was getting me was the usage of the word runes, as it's not used in stanza 79. It's used in stanza 80. So I find that very, very interesting because I was trying to piece together the Old Norse translation in order to make better sense of it. And so we're starting here as at the turn of what eventually is starting to, where it's like a brief look towards the future of the Hávamál as in relation to the Runatal, but it's not fully done yet. It's just making mention at this point of the runes. So for 79, certain is that which is sought from runes that the gods so great have made and the master poet painted. And then there it says, there's a gap there of the race of the gods. Silence is safest and best. Now, there is a general stanza placed in there in which it's that the master poet painted red and was given by the race of the gods. Silence is safest best. So it's not much of an issue, but I just thought it was very interesting because some of these as we're going, like I have not gone through all of the Old Norse of every stanza. That would be, that's an awesome undertaking and would be fun in my opinion. But for me to sit here and honestly say I've done it already would be a lie. So a lot of these are coming about and I'm trying to piece them together as we're going. And it's super interesting along with Bellows' translations of how he sought the word order in order to make these things happen. But the Old Norse stanza 79 in English and stanza 80 in Old Norse are the ones that are correct. They're aligned. And so I wanted to I don't know if it's the website. I honestly don't know why that is the case, but it threw me off. I was like, wait a minute, why is this flipped? And so I wanted to kind of address that and hopefully people can see it and understand. Again, this is why you need multiple translations. Not all of them are correct. Not all of them are perfect. And you have to be able to, perhaps you can use resources on the internet now in which you can, look up a runic not a runic dictionary, Old Norse dictionary, and kind of get these, but you have to kind of be able to understand, like the first part of 79 is Osnotter mother. Osnotter, snotter is wise. So Osnotter is kind of like the unwise man. So that is clearly stanza 80. So I think we should probably do these together. In 79 to 80, there is that there thou rent and thu ad runum spear. So those who spy or those who look upon the runes and those who seek the runes or the wisdom of the runum is the word that is actually used. And this is you'll find people try to say that runes are not or have never been truly classified as some sort of divinatory tool. And I would always point out to this part of the Völuspá, in which it's clearly stating that if the use of the word is speir is like seeing or to gain auspicious or augury. It's like augury. So for those who would turn to the runes for augury, that clearly connects the two. So if anybody ever comes along and says, well, Tacitus never said it was the runes and there's this, no, I would point to this verse in particular. that the divine powers, which in the Old Norse is Regen Kunum, the divine powers have set forth and painted them red. It is best that you not speak of. And so what this is really ultimately, I think, translating to is that if you know the wisdom of the runes and you know the magic behind them, you will learn much. And it is best that you keep silent about the knowing of such things. And that, I think, has a loaded meaning. Two meanings. One, if you are wise in the runes and you know them well, being of the mindset that this will draw attention. It will not take much. And I'm a believer, of course, in the divinational practices of the runes. It's actually how I came to Asatru to begin with, was when I was very young and I started doing runic as a divination tool. It's, if you know the runes, it will draw much attention to you. A lot of people are never without any wanting or need to know their future. And it is not always the knowing of the future, but again, it's really about interpreting the past and all of the cumulative actions that will lead to the most likely future. And with that power comes, I know it sounds cliche, but great responsibility, or at least an awareness or an understanding that it can cause you great trouble. So that's what this verse is ultimately warning about, is the runes that were given to us and can lead us into the paths of wisdom. It is oftentimes best to be silent of it because it will allow you far too much attention, if you will.
So I think this is also, you know, if we had paid a little bit more attention, you know, actually, I think it was a good place to stop. But I think that the reason these two are flipped in bellows, because I was looking at a couple of other translations and they're not, and on the side they're not. But as far as a natural transition, this seems to be a break between Odin's advice for travelers into his advice for lovers. And it seems to be a break in the conversation. It's a reiteration that, you know, this is the path of wisdom. The advice herein from the High One is worthy to listen to, is valuable, and is solid wisdom to keep with you through life and what you're doing. And it transitions from this point on into the discussion about women. And so I think that might be why those two got flipped, because this is kind of a standalone, and from here on out, you know, it starts the advice about women. But I think this is, I don't know, reiterating some of the bona fides of this piece of work. Like, hey, this is valuable. This is the wisdom of the gods. You need to listen to this. You need to take heed, and, you know, keep it close to your chest. It'll do you well. But wisdom is currency, and especially in the world that they're talking about. This is all about being very shrewd in your dealings and faring out from your inner yard into the wide world where people don't necessarily have your best intentions in mind. So, you know, don't necessarily overshare, and sit back and listen and have the wisdom. And that sums up a lot of what the first portion talked about. But I'd also like to make a note that while we were doing this, Michael Cosgrove donated $50. Hail the folk, hail the AFA, hail the gods. Thank you, Michael. We appreciate you very much. And then we also got from folk builder Mike Malilo $100 to the Njordshof Fund. And that will go a long way. And thank you so much for that.
I
Go
wanted
ahead.
to bring up a point here. In the certain part, so in 79, and again, if you're reading this on the website that we're following with the Bellows translation, you're going to be looking at 80 in the Old Norse. And there's a part in here where you'll see it says, and the master poet painted. And there is actually the Aukfáði Fimbulthulur. And that is an interesting use of the master poet, because Fimbulthulur means, of course, the terrible singer, or the Fimbul is kind of like, can be anywhere between awesome, terrifying, awe-striking, and of great renown, or great and unparalleled scope of greatness or bigness. And Thulur, of course, is the singer. So I find it, because most people might be familiar with Fimble Winter, in which, of course, is a great and terrible winter. So the master poet painted, the usage in the Old Norse is Fimble Thulur, terrible or of great and unbounding end singer or speaker of poems. Is of course, no doubt, they're referring to Lord Odin as the master poet who painted them. I wanted to bring that up as well. And then, yes, it does kind of, again, switch into the maxims of love. And so maybe that's why they kind of did that. But you can see, and I'm trying to paint this so that people can kind of get an idea of what they're reading in Old Norse when it comes to that. So like Regen Kunum, Rayen is like the word rain, or Reich, or a Rex, or a Reek. It is the dominion of. And this, of course, being the dominion of the gods. They are the Rayen Kunum. And then, of course, Gin Rayen, like Ginungagap, means great rulers. So if you see anything in there, anytime where you see anything with the word Regin, Rayen, or Reagan, depending on, some people think Old Norse, the G is harder, and in modern Icelandic, generally the G is softer. So, most likely it's Regan, but, I'm not well aware about that finite differentiation. But I wanted to bring that up. I thought that was interesting. The Fimbulthulur is the great poet, or the master poet. And I've never seen Fimble used in conjunction with master.
All right. Well, I think that's goes along with other by names for the Allfather, like Yig. And
Yes.
There are, like, especially in more archaic language, there's an overlap between, like, immense, powerful, awe-striking, and terrifying. There's an overlap between that I think speaks to the transcendent difference when you are confronted with divinity, because it is all those things at once. It's glorious, it's scary, it's awesome, it's profound, it's all of those things all at once, because you're dealing with something of an immensity much, much greater than you're accustomed. With that, could you take us into the next section of the Hávamál?
Oh, wait. Well, so to 80, the unwise man of his maiden's love. So here's an interesting one, too. So right off the bat, when you look at 80 and then 79 in the Old Norse, I already mentioned the word Osnotr. One of the great goddesses of the Asanya is Snotra. Snotra is the goddess of wisdom, or I would argue she's the goddess of social mores, and the importance of our ability to act noble and structure society. She is the she governs over the structures of things that are propriety and impropriety, what is seemly and unseemly, and so on and so forth. Very, very subtle power. But in this, osnotor is unwise man. But the other thing, it says, an unwise man, if a maiden's love or wealth he chances to win. So in this first part, it says, osnotor mother, unwise man, if I nask getter. I nask is not maiden. It doesn't translate to maiden at all. What it does translate to is the one that you seek, like betrothal, or that you have marked as your beloved, or marked as yours, because it could imply to other things. It's basically it mainly speaks of dedication. It's dedication to or dedication from. So in this sense, with the word getter, it is that you are trying to the one you are trying to dedicate to. I just find it very interesting that it doesn't quite say that it is a maiden. It's kind of more or less assumed. So an unwise man, if you want dedication from, it doesn't quite specify, but you're assuming one that you seek dedication from. And then the next word, fee, the flows munuth, fee is of course wealth. And just like if anybody's familiar with the runes or the younger Futhark. So right there, again, if you're looking for dedication from, again, it's presumed from a maiden or from a love, someone that you are attempting to gain attraction to, or wealth. His pride will wax, but his wisdom never. Straightforward, he fares in conceit. This is a really interesting and powerful conundrum. What we're talking about is that as confidence grows, very often you will find that wisdom does not grow as fast. That's basically what it's saying. His pride will wax, but his wisdom never. So it's basically stating that Lord Odin's saying that if you are to gain in confidence, if you are to move towards money and towards love, or towards attracting a suitable woman or man, I guess if this is coming from a woman's perspective, but if you're looking to attract a suitable partner, or money and wealth, and looking to gain in the world, you have to remember that your confidence will get you far, but your wisdom will get you farther, and you should keep them both in check at the same time instead of letting one supersede the other. Because what will end up happening is you will fall short, drawn into things where wise people will draw your conceitedness or your confidence against you. They'll pull you off. They'll pull your feet out from underneath you, top heavy, as you shift. So this is really stating that in order to gain those things, good things, and attain them, keep your wisdom and your confidence at the same trajectory as it grows. Don't let one supersede the other.
And again, we're in a section that has just profoundly accessible wisdom that I think, some folks who read this may need to take a moment to adjust to the setting or the time and the place. But, I think most any man will recognize the truth in a lot of these stanzas about women and about the pursuit of women. And it's just, I don't, okay. So one thing I think is worth adding on this is the effect that women's attention or lack thereof gives towards a man's confidence. We've talked when we went through Beowulf and some other things about the social dynamics involving women. I think it certainly was true in our ancestors' time, but I think it's true generally in society. We see it. how women can affect the social status or the perceived value of men that they are showing attention to or not showing attention to. And we see that displayed in all culture all the time. Here, on a much more personal level, I think many of us have experienced this growing up, but it's this, I talk about this very difficult paradox to break when you're a young man. Is, you want to be successful with the ladies, but you need to have confidence to do that. Well, how do you get confidence? Well, you get confidence by being successful with the ladies. So it's a strange thing. And, if we are fortunate, we find workarounds for that. But it's interesting because, if you get the attention of a woman, it is very, very easy for one to lose their head and abandon all wisdom and get very disproportionate in their confidence to wisdom ratio. And I think many of us have been there. But this is a good start to some really, things that I think that most of us, certainly the men, will recognize. And it's important to point out, I think that there's some cross application here between the genders, but we don't believe in equality. Nobody is the same. And a lot of the stuff we're about to hear about is very specific to women, not just to people who you have a love interest in, depending on who's listening, but specifically to a man as he goes out into the world and learns about women, especially if he doesn't have that experience coming in. This is very valuable advice on that.
I was wondering if maybe I could interject too, just to point out some cultural aspects of Asatru and us as Asatruer, perhaps a cultural look, just a brief understanding for those at home about the way our culture is. If you were to look at any other culture, if you were to look at Native American, if you were to look at Eastern, Oriental, Asian cultures, let's say Korea or Japan or something of that nature, they have a very culturally ingrained way in which they work with both the genders and how the genders work together. Well, our culture can be summed up very simply, or at least perhaps we could get an inkling of an idea of where we're going with this and where we'll go forward from in the Voluspa is from the gods themselves. We have 12 of our holy gods, and they are the vertical pillars of our world. They are the brunt that holds all the pressure. They are the axis mundi, if you will, as individuals that hold up the cosmic order of things. It is the Asanya who kind of move in between. And I just spoke of one of the great Asanya, Snotra. Snotra, of course, very subtle in her powers as she moves between these vertical pillars. And so we see these genders in our gods very clearly, and again, reflecting too, because we reflect the divine and they reflect us in many ways, especially in our stories. So the idea in this day and age where a lot of times our society is trying to force women or convince women that they need to be the vertical pillars, when a great amount of their power is their ability to move through the pillars. And they end up, in essence, influencing all of the pillars instead of being the singularity and being the thing that takes the brunt of force or the brunt of a condition or a responsibility or even an outcome or an inevitable fall. The weight that's laid on the vertical pillar is our society builds towards men taking that load bearing, whereas women gain their power and the goddesses show their power with their interweaving. So you'll see a lot of this is why that value that Asatru was talking about is placed in that. A man can gain great wisdom in his relationships with women, but in this context, especially from a cultural sense, is that view the masculine as a vertical and the feminine as an intertwining, almost like a basket or a fabric, or where we have a weft and a weave going in between the verticals. And if you look at it that way, you can then see how much of this speaks about the power of overstepping your bounds with someone who's interwoven. And you'll see this when in relation to families, in relation to, perhaps getting into trouble. And we'll see a little bit of that. And then the other is that how much of, again, clout it can bring to you. Our society holds that, where men do have the, with the wisdom of their wives, with the wisdom of their mothers or foremothers, and even too with their daughters, they gain a lateral sense of power in society instead of strictly a vertical and individual one. It's kind of hard, now that I'm saying it out loud, it's kind of hard to quantify, but that is a great analogy to start getting in the right direction. The vertical versus the horizontal weaving between, and how those two subtle differences kind of encapsulate the cultural essence of what masculine and feminine is amongst our gods and amongst our folk. And then, again, too, there is a balancing sense, like as much as there needs to be vertical, there needs to be horizontal. As much as there needs to be day, there needs to be night, or and so on and so forth. So very, very important, but different. Sorry, thank you for letting me rant on that one. Something I was thinking about earlier today. I wanted to somehow quantify that for folks, in a relation with how we, again, viewing the 12 major gods, the 14 major goddesses, the 10, Austvanir, and the 6 heavenly wardens. So, now we're moving to 81.
Mm-hmm.
Soapboxing there for a second. Let's look at this one here. 81. At evening, and this the Old Norse is the same. It's they're lined up at kveldi, at evening time, the kvelding time. The konu, the kona or konu, it's in Old Norse means woman or lady. There's lots of different words for lady. There could be fru or frua, frau, and kona and konu. There's a lot of different words for it, but in this reference, just for etymological, the word for woman in Gothic is kino, Q-I-N-O, kino, and in Old Norse is konu, and it's in the English language with the word queen, meaning woman. I believe the usage of the English word queen became kind of synonymous with the first woman, or the lady of the king, the first lady of the empire, or the first lady of the kingdom. But the word konu, kino, and queen all mean, in essence, woman. So give praise to the day at evening, to a woman on her pyre, to a weapon which is tried, to a maid at wedlock, to ice when it is crossed, and to ale when it is drunk. Now, that is by far, I think, one of the most warrior, it is a quintessential about the premising of the warrior aspect of the world. But the ultimate wisdom here is that praise nothing until it is seen or been tested or been through. And it's not saying that things aren't worth praising before. They might be, but those praises might fall short. You have all of this potential, and you start praising it on one thing and not praising it on another, and they both go across, and one of them falls out, or both of them fall out. Who knows? The idea is that it is far wiser to hold a great sense of value towards something that has passed its mark, passed through it. And this, again, culturally shows these things. So don't praise the day until the day is over. Don't start singing praises of the day unless you've laid it to rest. And then 2, a woman on her pyre. Again, we know that our ancestors held great regard for many of the ladies. The Osberg ship burial has 2 women in it. But what they're ultimately speaking of is that there is the potential that you could very well meet, and any man or anyone in the world could tell you you go into a relationship. Don't praise that relationship until you've been through some tough stuff or been through the gamut. And that's really what this is about, is you can speak the praises of a woman when the end is done, and you can explain all of the deeds that were attained. Same with a weapon. Don't praise a weapon. Don't grab a weapon and say, this weapon is the best weapon in the world, and it's never ever crossed blades. But let's say it's chipped or broken or being laid to rest, then you can speak of all the the survivability that it had as it lived its life. So it's really talking about the inconstant things, I guess is that the word for it. It's that all things have potential, but you should not mark them unwisely until they have fulfilled their potential and have seen the cycle from beginning to end. I think that's ultimately the wisdom of 81. It's just, I love the way Bellows writes it. It's so so strong.
This section is primarily themed about interaction with women, but this particular stanza, I find myself making reference to very often, completely unrelated to relationships, but just on that aspect of, it ain't over till the fat lady sings. Don't praise stuff until, I think that we've all found ourselves embarrassed, putting too high a stock on something that we had great hope for, that turns out to not be worthy of that we placed in it. And I think we've all seen that, be it with people, be it with circumstances, or, jobs or equipment or anything else. Keeping a certain degree of reserve and a certain degree of skepticism and reserving of judgment until, certainly you can do it best once something is completely finished, but in a more, I guess, a more applicable way. Certainly once something has been tested and shown that it's worthy time and again. And the more of those tests, once something goes through successfully, certainly the more trust you can put in it. And a lot of this, especially this next section here, is about things that you should trust and things that you shouldn't, and how much trust you should place in certain things. While we're on this, though, I would like to go ahead and acknowledge Emily Cosgrove, $25 to the Help a Family in Need Fund and $25 to the General Fund. Thank you, Emily. We appreciate it a lot. And then $20 from Caleb to the VNS Fund. Thank you, Caleb. We appreciate you guys.
It blows my mind, because I think that if there are people out there, perhaps, and I want new viewers, I want new people to see what the AFA, is in our perspective of things, especially in text and such. And I'm sure there's people out there, maybe not even people who necessarily like us. I want them to know that, like, the power of what we do, the might of our folk, is what makes things happen. Our folk are always helping, always giving, whether it's sweat equity, whether it's, donations. There are so many people in the AFA that are constantly placing the nail in, giving the drive time, donating when they can. And I wonder sometimes, or I sit back, I think, and again, perhaps it's not, again, I'm not praising too swiftly, but I am praising for what I have seen over many years. And I've seen it to the point where people wonder, like, how things are happening. How are these things getting done? Well, you can see it. It's in our folk, constantly giving. I'm blown away by it. I wanted to mark to 82, but I also wanted to make another point, what you said about reservation. For anyone who's reading 81, to ice when it is crossed, I think any child or anybody who's ever been near ice when they're a kid, or again, maybe perhaps ice fishing or something of that, there is a very real danger to that. And that what you said was really, really, I think, poignant, is about reservation. The idea is that you never just fully commit into the idea that the ice is safe. And so when in relation to like to a maiden at wedlock, what they're talking about is don't throw your heart all the way in until, you know, there's like that level of commitment has been made. And that could be, again, shared unilaterally. But the idea is that having that healthy reservation. And of course, you even brought up like heavy equipment, which I'm very familiar with, you know, working around equipment that could easily kill you. And so you don't praise it till it's had its trials and you know that, you know, you can trust in it. You build a relationship with the things you're working with, the tools that you have, or the vehicles that you're driving or operating. And you slowly gain a trust for these, for things around you. So don't be unwise and just throw reservation to the wind and say, oh yeah, everything's going to be great and everything's always going to work. And you're going to catch it somewhere down the line. And again, these 82 and 83 are very similar in this way. When the gale blows hewwood, in fair winds seek the water. Sport with maidens at dusk, for day's eyes are many. From the ship seek swiftness, from the shield protection, cuts from the sword, from the maiden kisses. And so I think what this stanza is really talking about is knowing the source of your desire. So when the storm blows, when the trees are to fall about, go to the place that you can't be felled with, you know, with broken wood and with the storm gales. Seek places that you know, in here in fair winds seek the water. So when you are moving about in the world and you're seeking pathways or attainment or companionship, you should be very, very clear in your understanding of what you want and what you need from those things, and don't convolute them. If you're looking to a ship, if you're looking again to a vehicle, swiftness is what you should find. Look to a shield for protection. Look for cutting power in a sword. Look for love and companionship in a lady. Look for, you know, an interesting one there. Sport with maidens at dusk, for day's eyes are many. That is an interesting one because it's basically saying don't overact in impropriety in the openings of the community. You should, in essence, try to maintain a decorum and a sense of privacy in the evening is the word that's being used there. You know, sport with maidens at dusk. In essence, keep to privacy, keep to where the vision is low, because it's unseemly to go about and you know, being overly flirtatious or overly I guess unseemly in the eyes of the day, which can be seen by all. You should, in essence, act with a sense of decorum and privacy towards people. If you have a liking towards someone and you seek to, you know, date them, then modesty is the path that should be taken. And this is in essence with the reference to the time of dusk, is keeping those things close. They're not aired out in front of everyone at the old thing. They're not on the road. They're not at the market. They're at night. They're at close confines. They're at the dinner table. So even though you could take this very simply as, if you're going to go hit on women, make sure you do it in the evening time. But I think the deeper wisdom is keep intimacy and propriety and modesty in the range in which you act in society. If you are a young man and you are trying to win the favor of a woman, spend that time in close proximity. Keep it at night when you can have one-on-one time, and don't make it so much a big thing in front of everyone. It's not about the pomp and grandeur of working that relationship in the open. It should be, again, more intimate. So, when you're in the storm, be clear of wood that can fall. When it's clear, travel. Find, speed in the ship. Find protection in the shield. Find cut in the sword, and find love in a warm maiden that you are attempting to woo. Know what you're going for, and keep them in a confined circle, so that way you can concentrate on things properly at proper times.
Yeah, and I think something else has to do with embarrassment, social pressure. There's a time and a place for everything. And I'm looking over at the chat, and there's, folks kind of talking on it, and Githia Anna's, saying, so don't flirt with everything in front of everyone. And it's one of those things. Or if you do, be prepared for the consequence of that. That's the thing. If you want to strut up and make your move in front of everybody, cool if it works. But if it doesn't, you're a laughing stock. Maybe she would normally be receptive to hearing what you have to say, but doesn't want to in front of everybody. It depends. A lot of this is about discretion, especially when you're traveling. A lot of this is advice towards, young men making their way in the world. And you certainly don't want everybody to see you get shot down. That's not necessarily a good look. So, yeah, I think some of this is about, doing the right things at the right times.
Yeah, and this is emphasized again in 83. Mm-hmm. But it does place a slight little tinge on that dichotomy about how you said with discretion, and the understanding is that you can also seek to find the potential in also those things. And I think that's what 83 really is talking about. By the fire, drink ale. Over ice, go on skates. This first line right there is really talking about the idea that if you're drinking ale and you're drinking with your friends, your family, your companions, your close people by the fire, you're sharing these moments. I've always kind of taken this as, don't drink ale in places you don't know. Don't go out into the world and sup on ale in houses that you don't know everyone in, or that you could find yourself in an impropriety situation. There's a difference between drinking ale amongst your kinsmen and friends than there is, say, amongst a lord or a manager or a boss or something, whatever it might be, in which there's that hierarchy. Basically what it's saying is drink ale when you're by the fire at your home with those that are close. Don't lose control over yourself. And then when you're going over ice, don't lose control over yourself. Go with the tools you need, like skates, in order to keep your passage straight, clean, and as swiftly as possible from point A to point B. Don't meander. Don't, set your pressures out too far to where, it could cause cracking. Buy a steed that is lean. The idea there, again, is that a hungry horse, a horse that has potential, a horse that is young and not fully of age, that's a horse that you can train, that's a horse that you can teach, and that's a horse that you can build a relationship with by feeding. So buy it, sometimes gain things in deficit. Drink close. Go over spanses that are unsure as swiftly and as cleanly as possible with things that are close to you. your skates are kind of an example of this, is that utilizing what you have immediately to get from point A to point B. Don't meander. Find a horse that's lean and build that relationship. Find a sword that's been tested. Find a sword that has been, and I find this, the usage of the word tarnished. I think that this kind of lends to the ideas is that, especially back in the olden days when iron was brittle, the idea was that you had a sword that could oftentimes only take so much damage. And so a sword that was unused perhaps had a longer life than one that had been used a lot, perhaps had been chipped, maybe cut or rehoned, reforged. Finding a sword that hadn't had much use in it gave it a certain sense of having the ability to weather the unknown. And so there's potential in it, in that sense of what they mean by tarnished. Because at home you can fatten the horse or build that relationship. At home you can feed the hound and build the relationship. But you start at a deficit and you start at a closeness and work your way out, is I think ultimately the wisdom of 83.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of little situational wisdom there that has a lot of different implications. You know, the bit about the sword, I think a lot of that has to do with know what you're looking for. If you're looking for a sword that's been tarnished, it's a sword that's old, that's been around, that's seen some stuff and stood the test of time. You know, the bright and shiny brand new sword may look awesome, but just like in the previous stanza, you can't trust it till it's been through some stuff. It may break the first time you pull it out of the scabbard. If you find an older weapon, it's been there, it's been through some stuff, and it's, stood up fast 2 or 3 times, probably gonna, it's got a track record of standing up, as opposed to something that's untested. But I also think there's a certain amount of wisdom in, getting a lean horse and feeding it at home, feeding the dog at home, being able to get something that starts out as a deficit, and then you can build and provide that value yourself and win a certain amount of loyalty by doing so. And so I think, some of that speaks a little bit to getting yourself a fixer-upper.
Right. I think anybody that's ever, found that car that needed a little love, or that house that needed a little love, or something that was in that deficit, it's seen days, but that with a little work and elbow grease, you can really build that something with it, that magic with it. I think any person can really relate to that stanza.
Yeah, and I mean, to cut right to the chase, getting people who are damaged, or who you can build up or add something significant to the relationship, puts you in a good spot relationship wise. If you're able to get somebody that's maybe had a hard time and you're able to provide them a better existence, that wins you a certain amount of loyalty and a certain amount of love and respect that you start out with, you wouldn't normally start out with. Somebody gets some hard times. If you're able to take good care of them, then all the better.
One of the things about the Havamal and the Maxims of Wisdom is that it does make me truly interested in other Maxims of Wisdom, whether it's the Tao Te Ching, or whether if some people might be familiar with the book called the Hagekure, the Maxims of the Samurai. This one too, and what you just said is very similar to a maxim in which he speaks of. He says, "Give me a samurai who has a defamation against his name, because he will work twice as hard to clear it, rather than a young man who has no reputation." Mm-hmm. And so that's something to, even though it's such a kind of very flat and easy to read stanza, there is a lot of wisdom in it, depending on which way you kind of look at it.
That's what I truly love about the Havamal, is there is so much value in there, and it's done poetically, and it's done but it's done in such a nuanced way with so many layers to it that there's a lot to digest. And I really mean this. Even if you've read it a bunch, read it some more. I don't know if this is Svan's experience. It's certainly mine. Every time I read it, I get more out of it. All 4 episodes that we've done so far, and we're making, slow progress through it. But every night that we do this, I take something, a little bit different away from it than I did the first time I read it. And that's true just on you're going to pick up new stuff because it is so filled with wisdom, but it's also true reading it at different seasons of your life when you have different experience under your belt makes it, as the kids say these days, makes it hit different than it did the first time you read it.
Yes. Sorry.
I gotta rap with the youth sometimes.
Oh, we are getting old. But it is true. I have, so for a lot of folks, and I referencing back to our first night where we were doing the Havamal, when I went to boot camp, my mother printed out a really kind of, now that I'm finding out, actually way later, an odd translation of a Swede who had translated it back in the 1800s. And I can't really find a lot of his translations now. She printed it out for me, and I read it often. And I think throughout pretty much from the year 2000 on, even into, I would say, again, it kind of lost from me in the 2015s to 2020s. I hadn't read it, and now I'm reading it again, and it's like, oh man, if I had just kept up with this throughout my life, I guess the conundrum is that I've learned much from my mistakes. And again, I think this is painted in the Havamal that Lord Odin speaks from a point of, this was my mistake, don't do this. And again, that instead of a commandment, it's kind of like a learn from my wisdom. But again, the Havamal is one of those poems that if you continually water it and continually go back to it, you'll find wisdom that could have applied if you had perhaps just read that stanza at this moment in your life. You might have avoided so much headache. And so it's like you have to kind of keep on it in order to keep that fresh.
This goes out to Sage of Sylvania over on Entropy, one of the very few people who are consuming this on Entropy. I did see your question, or your, I guess, series of your 3-part question, and we will absolutely get to it after we're done dealing with the Hávamál stanzas. But I just want to let you know that I did see the question, and we will be getting to it.
Yeah, that's hold on, folks. When we get through, we will definitely hit all the questions at the end. This one is an interesting one. 84 is one of those things where I think modern people try to kind of it to certain people who take a certain sensitivity to these things. This stanza has a tendency to kind of give them the about it. But I will point out that this stanza does couple with another stanza a little further down in the marking of emotional, I guess, emotional conquests or the attempts of conquest that both men and women have. This one, of course, first follows with the woman. And it's a note of wisdom, especially for young men who need to realize that, again, like ice, they're on shaky ground sometimes. And this is in 84. A man shall trust not the oath of a maid, nor the word a woman speaks, for their hearts are on a whirling wheel. On a whirling wheel were fashioned, and fickle their breasts were formed. And so what this really is talking about, I think, is that a man should be very reserved towards attempting to go all in, or attempting to placate or achieve some sense of complete happiness in a woman, because oftentimes women are not, that their state of desires can be fickle. Any man can see this. I find this a lot in my line of work now, where you'll find like during the time of the pandemic, so many young men and older men too were growing their hair out. They weren't really going to. We were, barber shops were shut down for almost 9 weeks, and it was a dry time and not a fun time at all. But what ended up happening is, as people were coming back, I found some men saying, "Oh, my wife or my girlfriend loves the long hair." And the whole time I've known this man, he's had a short, clean shaven, military style haircut. And suddenly it was like all along it was this way. And then after about a year or so, he comes in, he's like, "I got to cut it off, maybe for work." But more often than not, it's like, "Oh, she's over it." She is absolutely over it. She thinks I look like an underpass murderer. She thinks I look like a park stalker, like some sort of, wilderness wilding. And so you find kind of like the inclinations towards beards and no beards, towards hair, towards styles. Men often, and again, this is something that is just true to nature, is that men are oftentimes trying to seek out a way to appease or to attract or to highlight or lighten and grow the desire of a loved one, a lady. And oftentimes you'll see it spanning all kinds of spectrums, to where men don't. It's like, what do women want? It's like half the women say this, half the women say that. Some women say this, some women say that. They want a beard, but another woman says you look like a hobo. You should have a clean shaven face. And then other women say they just prefer to have stubble. And so men oftentimes, I think, and especially young men, are confused as to what it is that they can do in order to garner favor in perhaps a woman that they're seeking. And Lord Vodun is saying, you just have to be genuine. You can't go in there and expect the word of today to be the word of tomorrow. Be yourself. Highlight all the good things about yourself that you offer. And if you don't offer much, work on cultivating to offer more and better. But stay and maintain, because the masculine side of you is to maintain that vertical. What's more masculine than being who you are and saying, "This is who I am. I'm trying to improve myself for myself, and take me as I am." Because you can't always be chasing the desires of others, especially if you're trying to, again, win the favor of a lady. And if you're a young man attempting to do so, you're gonna be going back and forth. And I don't think that's necessarily the best energy. You'll find someone who finds you desirable and acceptable, so long as you continue to work on the quality of yourself over perhaps the inclinations of the person of the day. Especially if you're a young man and you're not entitled or oath to a single person, you're just kind of out there dating. If you attempt, it's like chasing cars. You'll be a dog chasing cars all day back and forth. Instead, focus on your quality, and you will find someone who finds you just right.
Svan is very nice. Svan is a very nice fellow. Bad cop time. Women are scandalous.
Okay, bad cop time.
Women are scandalous, and you can't trust anything that they say. Men, you know this. Women, if it makes you mad, it's because you know it too. Stereotypes for a reason. We all have stereotypes that cut against us. Something that's really important. This doesn't mean that every single woman's advice is completely worthless. Of course not. There's a long tradition in our ancestors of specifically seeking out wise women for advice. Often older women that are not in the dating scene, though. When you encounter women out there, especially a young man out there, this is good advice that I think we would all give our sons, whether we're mothers or fathers. Don't trust them girls. And it's a thing. And by all means, it says earlier, praise them once they're on the pyre, praise the maiden once she's wed, praise them once they prove that they are trustworthy. But it is so very, so I'm gonna keep my language clean, but it is very easy for guys to get all turned around, especially when guys first get involved with women, their first success with women in general, when they're first opening up to that, and then in a really different way when they first lose their virginity. That first girl that they will go all in head over heels, and they will wax in pride and not in wisdom. And I think we've all been there. We'll all, may not. Monk's advice on the side: don't date strippers. It's a thing. It's a thing.
Wise advice, evil monk.
No, that's a thing. Sometimes precisely the qualities that will make a woman particularly sexually appealing to young men are some of the same qualities that make you really have to stop and question your life decisions. We've I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the hot, crazy matrix. Like there is a direct relationship between hot and crazy, and you've got to figure out like where on that spectrum you can wind up. But that's the thing. I think that one of the important aspects of Asatru is that we keep it real. We don't believe in equality. We don't get all butthurt because somebody says something true about us or about our group, be that racial groups, be that genders, be that age, be that, stereotypes are that way for a reason. It's not worth getting butthurt over. If you're a lady and you don't like that this is a standout feature of your sex, then go out of your way to make yourself the one that disproves it. Make yourself the one that, that shows how it can be done right. And gentlemen, when we get to parts about, stuff we need to work on, own it. But I think that honesty, truth is one of our virtues. And certainly when you're on the dating scene, be very cautious because women can be scandalous and they can absolutely break your heart, especially if you wear it on your sleeve and you throw it out there too early. And I mean, shoot, I say that from experience, and I think that most of us here have had those kind of experiences. So I think it's wisdom, and we all know that it's valuable wisdom.
Yeah, one thing that culturally, when we talk about how a father with a daughter, and he's like, oh, I know how these boys are, blah, blah, blah. That's very, very common. And I think that's a trope that we are all familiar with. But the one that we don't often talk about is the mother who sees her son getting twisted up by a girl that's messing with his emotions, messing with his head. They don't talk about that very often much. There are mothers out there who have certainly experienced it, where they're like, look at you, you got your head all twisted up. This girl's got you on her finger. She's just, pulling you this way and that. And this scandalous little girl is twisting my boy up.
Well, so this is a thing too, and I'm glad that this was asked. Finn Wraith says, what about women that used to do that sort of thing, but don't anymore? They claim they've changed. So here's the thing. They all claim they've changed. And they're not all wrong. A lot of them are. And I think that's the same with guys that have had, heavy indicators in their past that you should kind of steer clear to. Everything changed. Some of them have. Quite a bit of them haven't. This stuff, it's important. Our lore is really significant that way. Most of this is not an outright condemnation of behaviors. It's advice, but what's just as important as the positively stated advice is the inverse. You don't have to do any of these things the way that Odin advises here. But if you don't, be aware of the consequence. And maybe you want to use that to your advantage. That's the thing. Know what you're getting into. Doesn't say you can't do these things, but if you do them, go in with your eyes open, go in with your wits about you, go in with your head on a swivel, and hopefully it works out. That's the thing, if you're willing to pay the cost, if you're willing to gamble on it, then by all means. But what's really important, and I think that this is one of the great lessons in Asatru and in, I don't know, being a man in general. Don't just blindly stumble into stupid things. If you calculate a risk and you still want to take it, by all means. If you know what you're getting into and that's what you want, okay. But don't stumble into it because you didn't know any better. Go in with your eyes open. And that's very much what a lot of this is advising.
And you brought it up too about in the question, women that claim they are not like that anymore. What we're talking about is that spectrum of age, because the usage of the word mayar or a maiden. So we're talking about youth. And I think that's one thing that is kind of lost. People will plant it with the idea of like woman or man. But no, what we're talking about is young men and young women. And kind of, again, that time, even our ancestors and Lord Odin is speaking about that time of great wisdom being learned through a lot of these kind of tumultuous times in our lives, where as we're young, and so as we do grow through these moments.
Speaking of that, factoid for those who are listening that might not know, what greater work does the Hávamál come from?
Wait, did you ask me that?
Yes, I did.
Oh, you mean overall the Codex Regius or the Eddas?
Okay. And what does the Eddas translate to?
Oh, well, the wisdom of the elder woman, or the
So I'm putting this in context. Yes, don't trust these scandalous girls out there, whatever. But the entire focus of what Svan and I have been talking to you about for weeks is encoded in books that are literally like wisdom from your grandma.
Right.
So it doesn't mean don't heed the advice of any female at any stage in her life, but be careful of the young ladies.
Right. And it's, I think that's worth noting again, because it also portrays in the other stanza in relation to men. It speaks of men, but it's talking about young men. It's talking about young men with a specific desire and a specific intent. And I think ultimately, even in our culture today, we find, I think that for the most of us, we find ourselves settling down in our later 20s. That may not have been a thing, a long time ago based on, life. So, life expectancy.
As a mic drop on this and moving on to the next line, Githya Anna says, your grandma wouldn't want you to date a hussy either.
Yes. Well said. Okay, yeah, that is a mic drop. Okay, we'll move on from there. Now, 85. So 85 to 88 are actually, we're gonna hit them one right after the other, because in essence, this is one of the biggest parts of the Havamal, which has a succession of points that are more or less to say in a kind of rhyming scheme of measure in the poem, but ultimately reveal at the end of 88. So 85 to 88 can kind of be seen as a cluster with the point of wisdom at the end of 88. So it's basically just a list of things, and we'll go through them very, very quickly. So in a breaking bow, or a burning flame, in a ravening wolf, or in a croaking raven, in a grunting boar, a tree with roots broken, in billowy seas, or a bubbling kettle. So it in essence, as the verses are being spoken, it's laying the groundwork like cobblestone, all of these things. So if we move to 86, we continue on. So again, we've got the breaking bow, we've got the ravaging wolf, we've got the grunting boar. 86 says, you know, in a flying arrow or falling waters, i.e. a waterfall, in ice newly formed, or a serpent's folds, again, the coiling of a serpent. Ormi is the word used, and it means the circles or twining of a serpent. In a bride's bed speech, or a broken sword. In the sport of bears, the fighting of bears, or in the sons of kings. 87. In a calf that is sick, or a stubborn thrall. And I wanted to get back to that one in relation to the thrall or thrali. A flattering witch, or a foe newly slain. That's an interesting one too. In a brother's slayer, if thou meet him abroad. In a half-burned house. In a horse full swift, one leg is hurt, and the horse is useless. None had ever such faith as to trust in them all. That's the final line. No one should have any faith in any of those things that were stated and put full trust in them. So with that being said, again, I think it's good to look back at them and kind of understand what's poetically being said. I find there's some spookiness to some of them, but you know, like in the serpent's folds, like you never put your hand out on a serpent that's coiled. You know, if you see bears fighting amongst each other, never take to think that you can just stand there and watch, because they could easily turn on you. Anybody that knows that or has ever been out in the wilds, and I'm sure you have, as you're living in Alaska, the idea of, you know, bears being preoccupied and then the next minute they're occupied with you. You know, you don't take into full confidence any of these situations, because they all have an air of clear and present danger. And that's what 85 to 88. But 87 is such an interesting one, the flattering of a witch and a foe newly slain. And I think that is not talking about, say, perhaps a draugr or an undead. I think what they're talking about is, you know, when you slay a foe. I know that, for instance, in the military, when we talked about the idea of conquest of an area, the thing that you did is you never, ever rested on your laurels after conquesting an enemy. In actuality, you had to immediately prepare for a counterattack. So anytime
why is that? Why is that, Svan?
Say again?
Why is that, Svan?
Immediately preparing for a counterattack? Because, again...
What's the name of the broadcast?
Victory never sleeps.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes, and again, it talks about that, because that motion, that doing any huge wefts in weird that cause a great amount of repercussional energy require you not to stand on your laurels, but to immediately prepare for the reaction. And so I think that ultimately is what that's saying of a newly slain foe, is that you now have created a situation in which you cannot just, you know, strut and say, I win, I'm the best. In reality, you have now committed your life down a path that, you know, there are others who may seek to retaliate against you almost immediately. And so don't rest on your laurels. Don't ever commit to the idea that any of these moments are solely going to end up the way you perceive them to end up. That again, the bending of a bow, I thought was an interesting one too, because it's the idea is that when you pull a bow, you in your mind think, I'm going to release the string and the arrow is going to go. But every time you pull that bow, you should think, what if this is going to break? How is this going to turn? So never fully just committing to the idea that I do this and this is going to happen. You know, these bears, they're preoccupied with themselves. They're never going to turn on me. And then all of a sudden they are. so again, I think it is about don't let your wisdom wane while your confidence waxes in anything.
Hands up, keep your head on a swivel, be
at all
prepared,
times,
and stay moving. That's such an important theme in our faith. The sun and the moon are perpetually moving because the second they stop, they'll be devoured by wolves. Entropy is our biggest foe. It's when chaos sets in. It's when you start to lose. Keep moving forward. But all of these things are poetic ways to tell you, like, no, keep your head about you, especially when you're dealing with women. It may not seem like it, but dealing with a woman is just as dangerous potentially as all these other life-threatening perils that you face out in the world. That common sense tells you, of course, you don't trust those things. But common sense fails very often when there's a woman showing you some attention.
Yeah, the words of a woman and the brother's slayer, I think, also kind of lend towards the culture of the time too. I think that it was very common for men folk to, again, perhaps be wooed or seek the approval of a woman without realizing perhaps the enemies he made with her brothers or her father or her uncles or some of the men folk of the time, not understanding the full repercussions and how far things spread. So that, and in a brother's slayer, if thou meet him abroad, away from the laws and the rules of the courts, if you meet your enemy, if you meet the slayer of your brother, he is more than likely going to be more or worse abroad when there is no presence of law, there's no presence of repercussion. If he has the ability to be treacherous, he will take that route because he's already proven it by slaying your brother. It's just now
guys, heed this because it goes to all level of things. Maybe they're just, using you and having fun, and the next guy that comes around that, has more social credit than you, they're going to drop you for. That's certainly one of the dangers. But in general, you're out in a new place, country boy in the big city, and, some girl talks nice to you and says, hey, come over here where we can talk alone. And next thing you know, you're getting robbed. Those things happen. Or, we get lonely guys that get online and try to meet someone, maybe try to meet someone at a distance. Hey, well, I need money for this. Hey, I need money for that. Hey, can you, send me some money and I'll get a plane ticket and then I'll come and we can be together. And then next thing you know, you don't hear from him again. And you got had. And there's a lot of that. And preying on men's weakness for the attention of women is one of the most surefire ways to take advantage of a man. Is if you can find a female accomplice to get them to let their guard down, men that would normally be very shrewd make terrible mistakes. And I think we've all been there more than we would like to admit.
I think the intricacies of weird and the intricacies of living, one of the big things about all of these stanzas is that the gods do not alleviate us from peril. A lot of folks, perhaps maybe if they were growing up Christian, they would think that any woe that befell them was some sort of a test or in an unknown plan, and that only good things can come, from being faithful. Well, in Asatru, the idea is that the cultivation of piety towards the gods is an internal fortification. It's an ability for us to weather things that the gods are clearly saying they cannot, will not, and really should not alleviate us from. And that is the perils of the world. We have to learn. We have to grow. We can have a stronger stance when we are pious, when we are faithful, and when we are contemplating the wisdoms of the gods and living with a relationship with them. But it does not alleviate us from peril. And we know that. We don't think that that's the God's job, is to somehow, obfuscate, or not even obfuscate, eliminate dangers and calamity. We will face those things, and we know that. And it's not always the gods aren't in the machinations of all that is entirely bad or good. Much of it can be done by us cultivating our internal self and then acting accordingly in noble and in honorable sense, with wisdom, letting our wisdom wax with our confidence. But none of it is ever fully just, if you believe in the gods, you're never gonna be faced with woes. No, in actuality, the world, and what tests a warrior, what tests the soul, the might of our folk, is understanding that, yes, we will have good times, but we will have bad times as well. And it's not their place to alleviate you as an individual, one singular person in the grand scheme of all the folk that they are kind of watching over. You're going to experience woe and weal. And so you should, be aware of that. That wisdom that you have is what's really going to get you through it. And the gods are kind of gleaning and showing ways to attain that, but they don't just, it's never just a plug in and immediately understand. You're going to have to learn.
All right.
89. Yeah. 89 kind of states this again. Hope not too surely for early harvest, nor trust too soon in thy sun. The fields need good weather, the sun needs wisdom, and oft is either denied. I love this stanza because it is really good. It's very well written. That the way Bellows wrote it it's basically stating that you cannot, again, place too much in the idea and the notion that the things that you're working towards are going to always pan out. And the people that you invest in are going to always come out perfect. In reality, it takes a lot of work. It takes a long amount of work, and it takes work over a great amount of time. And that's only with the idea that you may get 75% of what you're going for. There's always something, and there are things that are constantly, again, moving with and against us as we create our deeds in the world and weave the weird of the world around us. And that requires patience. It requires us to really prioritize our deeds and our actions in order to gain a modicum of what we want as opposed to what we may get. And I think this is really good. Nor trust too much in thy sun, because the fields need good weather, or there are factors that are out of your control, and a son needs wisdom, and often they are both denied, good weather and good wisdom. If you think to perhaps other families and see calamities that might befall them through their children, and it may, from an outsider's perspective, you might see things that perhaps they don't see living their lives, but they get embroiled in something and they neglect this time in their child's life, and that child ends up kind of running off and seeking guidance from other people or his friends instead of listening to his father or his brothers or his mother. This 89 is one that I think about a lot, especially now as a father. It really does. Am I giving enough? And ultimately, to what point do I have to understand that there are certain things out of my control, that I cannot helicopter over my kids? Not that I do. I'm just saying I don't think any parent wants their kid to be neglected or out in the cold, but you have to understand that there are certain things that are unaccounted for. You don't have control over, so you really have to focus on what you can control. You can control the work that you put in the field. You control the water that you can maintain. But there are certain factors in the world that are simply going to shape the child or shape the field that you have to work with. You have to work through. It's never just fully. The gods are not going to give you, lands of milk and honey because you follow the covenants. that is a false notion, and I think that most and anybody with any modicum of wisdom knows that.
That's one of the very big differences, and the only reason I bring it up is because so many of us have the social context of a certain amount of Christianity in our culture, in our family, maybe in our own past. One of the really important distinctions to realize is that being a key difference. The entire way that faith is set up is that you are saved by faith alone and not by works, that none should boast. That principle is, no, let Jesus take the wheel so that you have nothing to brag about. All your success is because of the grace of their God. That's very, very different than our faith. Our gods want you to have deeds worthy of boasting. They want you to be the hero. It's not blessed are the losers. It's blessed are the winners. And in order for you to do that, you have to have your own agency. You have to be able to carve out your own victories in the world and be responsible for your own success. You are absolutely, saved is, I think, the wrong word, but you are exalted through works, through deeds, and not just by faith. Yes, being faithful is part of living a noble life, but doing good deeds and being a responsible person who has agency and responsibility in the decisions that they make, that's what builds, that's what our gods want from us, is to get as close to being that hero as we can be.
I wanted to bring up on 87, there is a manuscript. If some other people are following on the website, the stanza 87 is incomplete, and some editors have added later paper manuscript 2 lines. So 87 would read as thus: in a calf that is sick, or a stubborn thrall, a flattering witch, or a foe newly slain, in a light clear sky, or a laughing throng, in the bowl of a dog, or a harlot's grief. And I wanted to, one thing about the thrall and the idea of our ancestors had slaves. I think most any culture has always had slaves, and a thrall being stubborn. It's worth noting in the idea that oftentimes the slaves of our ancestors were sometimes war won through conflict. Sometimes they were at least perhaps prizes of war from someone else, and they saw an opportunity to market this situation. And I'm, not trying to go into the context of slavery in modern times versus the past. It's just knowing that thralls of our ancestors had a great amount of power. Sometimes they were given responsibilities over a great many things and could earn their freedoms depending on the situation in which they lived, whether they were in Iceland or Norway, or whether they, perhaps were from countries where the languages were similar, like Nordic countries, and then perhaps where they might have had language differences that were so great it was very hard for them to ever gain any sort of homogeny amongst the community. And you would see this with Gaelic speaking or with Slavic speaking people that were caught up in the situations that were as far as kingdoms and thraldom. But I like too that it says in the light of a clear sky. Again, what it ultimately saying is that you can't just take for granted the things you have and assume you're always going to have them. Nothing is ever in a state of permanency, is what I think ultimately these stanzas are also saying. Everything that's being talked about is being talked about with the idea that there is no state of permanency that you can rely on, that the world is always in a ebb and flow, and that you have to work hard to project for and against the, what finding when the flow goes with you and working when the flow goes against you in all things. The laughing throng, again, people would, that's a perfect example of, not everybody that laughs, laughs with you or not everybody that laughs is laughing with you. That I think is what the laughing throng is that oftentimes, they're laughing at you. They're laughing at perhaps your foolishness or your deeds that warrant laughing. And so you shouldn't take into the idea that everybody laughing is laughing with you. In the bowl of a dog too is another one and you have a loyal hound, but don't go sticking your hand in the food bowl. You might get bit. No matter how much that hound loves you, you're testing things. you're thinking too greatly in that it will always be one way and that you shouldn't. So let's move on to 90. I just saw too that Alcerigo was getting a screen break real quick. So let's move to 90. As of course we've went through 85 to 88 and then of course 89, very well written. But 90, the love of a woman, fickle of will, is like starting over ice with a steed that is unshod, a 2-year-old restive and little tamed, or steering a rudderless ship in a storm, or lame hunting reindeer on slippery rocks. It couldn't be any more clear that this is simply stating the ideas that there is very little foundation. There is very little security in things like winning the love of a woman, especially when you're young. It could be a fickle time. Starting over ice with a horse that has no shoes. This is a rudderless ship. These are things that, again, there is no foundation in it, and you should not expect a foundation in it. You should have the wisdom of understanding that at a moment's notice, things could turn in a different direction, and you should never say to yourself that it's simply, it's all going to work out. Everything's going to be fine. That's a fool's errand. In essence, you should only trust on what you have and what you can control, and account that there are certain things out of your control and certain situations that are from the get-go unfoundational, and you should move with caution, move slowly, and move with a sense of steadiness. Don't rush headlong in. And again, I think this is overemphasized again and again in the maxims of love. Don't rush in. Don't go head over heels. Don't bank on foundation. You should always go with caution, always go with wisdom. So let's see. Moving from 90, 91. So this is where it begins to, there's an addition of, in the poem, the speaker and being Lord Vodun, or being the Thuler, the poet that is speaking, there starts to begin a sprinkling of context of speaker. And you'll see it here in reference to the idea that it's like, I was this way and I shouldn't have been this way. Or I am soberly speaking now, but could not state that I was always that way. Again, there's context to the wisdom coming from the idea is not a commandment, but yet more I have experience, so let me teach you through context of what I have learned. So in 91, clear now will I speak, for I know them both. Men false to women are found. When fairest we speak, then falsest we think. Against wisdom, we work with deceit. So 91 is that stanza I was talking about that kind of counterbalances the idea of women's hearts being fickle and on the whirling wheel. Again, in reference to perhaps, it's not mentioned, but it is, some people add it into their translations, the whirling wheel of clay, or a clay wheel. And in this sense, it's clearly stating that men who have the desire to attain something, they are not always forthcoming with what they're trying to attain, and will often say whatever it takes to get what they want. So here, I think it's this kind of counterbalances that earlier stanza, and this is now in reference to men. Men are false to women, and when they speak fair, they often speak false. Against wisdom, we work with deceit. And I think that is another key point to that line, is that it would be far wiser to speak the truth and speak with intent, speak with closeness and intimacy towards the person. But instead, what we do is we oftentimes fill with flattery and fill with false notions in order to gain what we wish, but it ends up causing far worse problems. I'm sure many of us have had situations where we were young and we spoke about what we wanted, and we, spoke flowery words, and then, 3 days later it falls short or it breaks apart, and then it causes great amount of venom. And that deceit, instead of erring with wisdom, brings on a whole slew of problems. And I think 91 is clearly, speaking in reference to the idea that you should be aware that when you do such things as speaking false words, when you choose to go for what you want versus perhaps what is best for all, and you only care about your own intentions, you're going to be planting seeds for the succession of more things to come at you that cause more problems and cause more woe. So if you wish to avoid that, err on the side of wisdom. Let's see. So we're moving to 92. So soft words shall he speak, and wealth shall he offer, who longs for a maiden's love, and the beauty praise of a maiden bright. He wins whose wooing is best. So I think this is, again, speaking of the maxims of lovers, is that Lord Woden is speaking here about the idea that it is best to speak, if you are trying to attain the love of a lady, wooing with words of softness. It's of, again, the cultural context is that we do understand that we are different, that men and women are different, and that it is softer words, kinder words, wooing words that gain us the ability to perhaps get closer and more intimate and learn more about a woman that we're pursuing. But there is another aspect too, and I like this part, is, and wealth shall he offer. What this really is talking about is, again, stability. A man should, and I think within our culture, it's very understood that a man should not be a louse. A man shouldn't be someone who offers nothing, who has attained nothing for himself. And so the context of your wealth is really about how much you do work towards bettering your life, bettering your living situation. You're not some guy living in mom's basement. You're not some guy living, in an empty apartment, solely with, just a lawn chair or a camping chair and a TV. You are working towards improving your life. You're showing that you have the ability to provide. And that is really what this is about, is that you can be a strong man and a harsh man. You can be a man that knows what he wants and knows what he needs to get. You can enter into the world with confidence. But when you speak to women, you should speak with a sense of it. The word is actually more translates not to soft, but to fair words. Fair words being words that are, again, not so blatant or harsh, and that you should show that you have wealth and an ability to provide. These are things that women are looking for and that men should strive to attain. And that, if you are what do they call it? A coal chewer, I believe is the word that it was kind of translated to, or, a fireborn, when you're sitting close to the home fire, is the equivalency of like, you never leave the comfort of your home. You're in mom's basement, or you're in the basement, or you're, that kind of modern context of usage of it. And instead what you should be doing is attempting to gain security and wealth in your job, in your focus towards things. And I think that is another modern thing that we neglect to talk about. Women are attracted to men who are focused and devoted to something. And I'm not saying that you need to be devoted to like just strictly wealth or money, but the idea of security, the idea of, again, upward mobility and movement, of the fehu in your life, the feo or the fae in your life is flowing. You have a job, you're working towards goals, you're a person, a man with focus. This is what attracts, and this is what women are looking for. And I think that that's okay. It's okay to do that. And if a man, finds a woman who is, not doing the same thing, she's not perhaps focusing on creating stability in her life. We oftentimes find men and women, young men and women, simply attracted to people on the upfront, and then when they get into their life, they're a mess. Their house is a mess, their rooms are a mess, their drive to do anything with their jobs and with the mobility of their wealth is inert. And more often than not, as I think as I've grown older, perhaps I didn't see it so much when I was younger, but looking back now and seeing young men and young women interacting with each other, you see that the success of young people is based on their motivations, their drives, what they're trying to do, seeking stability in their life and calm, or seeking, planning, projecting, manifesting will, and creating a better life for themselves, and ultimately with the thought of creating a better life for a future family. That this is the best wooing is proof in the pudding. Let's just put it that way for 92. Yeah, Michael just said, too, the fact that you have to state this to men today is a fair assessment of the state of the world and its morals today. Yeah, that's true. I mean, when we look at this, but again, the interesting part of this is the Hávamál. This is a problem that we've had to deal with for a very long time. So I don't think it's good for us to get this doom mindset that it's only strictly now. There are new threats. There are new things, again, new, like they spoke of, like Laura Odin spoke of before. There are new things that the field has to weather, things outside of your control. There are things that can very easily draw our children into a world of complacency, in a world of false notions. They get wrong ideas. They get fed ideas that are completely ridiculous and oftentimes erroneous. But these are problems too that I think our ancestors also dealt with, and we should take solace in that and know that wisdom can prevail. It prevailed then, it can prevail now. And we ultimately should, again, we're trying to get that 75% of the ultimate of what we want. You might not get that 100%, but it's I was joking with Alice Hirigothi about it. It's like, these Tates and these kind of masculine internet personalities that men are kind of flocking to, and it's really they're they are selling and making money off of common wisdom that perhaps fathers, brothers, uncles, grandmothers, mothers, elders in our community should be enlightening our children with. And I think one of the biggest problems is with wisdom, wherever it comes from, it's sometimes hard to accept it when it comes from our families nowadays. We are so virulently independent that it's to a fault that we become foolish and unwise. When we don't look to the wisdom of the gods, when we don't look to the wisdom of our church, when we don't look to the wisdom of our families, we don't look to the wisdom of our friends who are successful, and we turn to, what's readily available on our phone with some internet talking head, just kind of pay me and I'll show you how to be a millionaire. We end up, that's where I think we get a great disconnect that we should. So I don't know. Let's keep moving forward. And I know because we have so many stanzas and we have been moving relatively slowly, but the maxims of love are, again, kind of reemphasizing the points. This one I really do like, because this kind of, again, there's another air of wisdom that we've probably heard in a different way, but in this one here, 93, fault for loving let no man find, ever with another. Oft the wise are fettered where fools go free, by beauty that breeds desire. And this, often the best way to say this is, you can throw very little discourse at what drives people to love each other. What is good for some is not good for others. And often, again, you will find that wise men are fettered by their love of, or their infatuation for, someone who is beautiful, while fools are unaffected by such things. By beauty that breeds desire. This is really, again, when you find that you meet a wise person or somebody you take a high value in their word, and they suddenly get twisted up in some wooing desire for someone, and it's like they are completely smitten to the point where they're no longer wise. And so that what ultimately 93 is talking about is that love is a fickle thing, and you will find even wise people can quickly get wrapped up in the delusion, where sometimes dullards or unaware people who we would consider as being, it's that guy's not too bright, but yet he's unaffected by the wooings and the machinations of someone who may be trying to manipulate other people. And oftentimes you find wise people are easily manipulated by things that they desire. Especially, I think you find that a lot with people who perhaps when they were younger, they had a lot of personal issues with themselves, and they don't realize that all things are transient, and all things have a kind of an ebb and flow in our lives. And so then they do grow into being a very handsome or beautiful person, but they're always still kind of that vulnerable person. And so, they remember themselves at their worst of times. And so then they enact, or they hold on to someone who, feeds into their insecurities that way, almost to the point where it's an addiction. I know many of us have probably seen this with men and women who seem to go back towards abusive relationships because that relationship is somehow moving through who they are now to perhaps a person they were a long time ago. And that person is filled with deep, either traumas or perhaps lacking in great, amounts of confidence, or experienced things in which they felt powerless or absolutely just not who they wanted to be. And they find that these abusive relationships ends up kind of feeding into those times, even though now they're successful, they're beautiful. They don't even look like, the goofy kid that they were in high school, but they're still in that mentality of that time. And so I think this is really stating that you can't place a lot of derision on people because the heart is such a strong and palpable thing that guides wise people into ruin, and sometimes leaves the unaffected, the close-eyed or close-minded or highly focused person that doesn't even realize what's going on. They're just focused on simple things, and so oftentimes you might consider them unwise, but in certain situations they're in the best of situations, and the wise people are often the ones that are getting emotionally pulled. And I that's another thing. We see that a lot in people that are convinced that they're extremely educated, but yet can be easily swayed by an emotional argument. They have absolutely no contest of critical thought. Instead, they're immediately wooed into these kind of false arguments based off of emotion alone. We see that all the time. So, be wary of that. Wise people can still be swayed by their emotions and by their heartstrings, whereas again, people that are driven and people that might be just focusing on what they got in their hands and what they're doing every day, these people are unperturbed by a lot of the emotional screechings and gnashing of teeth that a lot of people like to throw at other people, especially on the internet these days. So let's see. Just making sure. Am I mute? Am I muted? Or is that on your side, Nick? Okay. Okay. Aren't we all sometimes? So let's move into 94. Or excuse me. Yes, and 94 reemphasizes again exactly what 93 is. Fault with another let no man find. For what touches many a man, wise men often into witless fools are made by mighty love. And I think this is also prevalent when we talk about mentorship. When we meet people of great renown and wisdom that mentor us, be aware that they are not free of faults, and be aware that even though they may be wise and they may be very successful, they can be pulled into ways of the fool. I think we see this a lot in the relationships where you'll see a man who has a loving wife and wonderful children and a good house, and for some reason just trounces all of that. And I'm not saying that every person is like that, but I think anybody could easily think of perhaps a case that's very similar in our lives where we've seen this. And there is nothing more foul than the wisdom that is lost in that somebody is willing to throw away so much work and good things in the whim of a moment. And those people you should avoid. I think if you find a mentor, excuse me, if you find a mentor who then one day shows that side of themselves where you see them being easily swayed by money or gambling or the whims of an affair or love, I'm not saying that all of their wisdom is not, but what I am saying is that again, you start seeing that the foundations of that person are not fully secure. But ultimately, these are saying too is that you have to understand that people, no matter how great you build them up, are all prone to these faults. And having the ability to speak to them and tell them, like, no, you're a wise person, you should know that this isn't the way to go, is important. I think in the long run, it's worth stating that to build a better relationship with that person. But you can't assume that even the wisest of people are free from the inadequacies that maybe they once dealt with when they were younger, or that they've met someone who is feeding into the insecurities that you don't get to see because you see all of the wise things and all of the good things. Everybody's got these things deep down inside. All of us have it. And we have to be aware that they're there, and that you can't just, assume that anyone is just free of faults. And oftentimes it is in the form of emotional, maelstroms that fall on these normal, wise, sturdy, strong seeming people. So always with an air of understanding that no one is ever fully the primogen of what you may think they are, and that you should take care to that and understand that's the case. And you yourself should have the wisdom, and hopefully you have the wisdom to see that whenever you get into those situations, oh, whoa, wait a minute, I am now being led around by the nose because I feel a certain way, or I want a certain thing. Why am I doing that? Is it because of insecurities that no one else can see? Maybe that's why they think I'm all over the place. I remember seeing this a lot in the early days of the internet, when you would see people kind of wearing their emotions on their sleeves or cryptically writing things. You'd find a person who seems perfectly normal and a really wise person, a good person, a successful person. And then all of a sudden they're writing these kind of cryptic things or posting odd things on social media, and you're wondering, like, what the heck is going on? These people are still dealing with issues, and perhaps we all are, and that you should have the wisdom to understand that, ride those out, maybe allow them a certain air of room to make those mistakes, or at least give your opinion and realize that you might just have to hunker down and let this person experience something in their life. Because more often than not, if you stick with them, they will turn back and say, I made a big mistake. I was not thinking correctly. I was being a fool, and I treated you wrong, or I treated my friends wrong, or treated my family wrong. And I really wish I could go back. And if you have that wisdom to see that they have the capability of having faults, then they in turn also have the capability of mending those faults, or mending the results of those faults later on. And it's not so black and white. It's not just like, oh, you screwed up during that time and I'm never going to be your friend again. This is kind of, again, these verses are bringing about that air of understanding that none of us are free of faults, and that we should weather things with an understanding that we all are working through our foolishness. Oftentimes our desires are quick to go into unfoundational things, or throw all in, or you got to work. No, even they too are going to go through times again, multiple times through their lives. And friendships can be born out of understanding that they have faults. 95 is a truly beautiful stanza. Again, it's just reemphasizing that, again, people have faults, and their emotions are oftentimes can be their undoing, but it's written so beautifully. The head alone knows what dwells near the heart. A man knows his mind alone. No sickness is worse to one who is wise than to lack the longed for joy. And I think this one is, again, I've always been deeply interested in criminal psychology, and the idea that seeing the motivations of people doing terrible things, just absolutely horrible things to loved ones and to people that don't really deserve it. And you always end up asking yourself, like, why would they do such a thing? And more often than not, it's that the worst. A lot of people are walking around with deep wounds that they're still trying to placate or mend. Some of them have not fixed it. And so you should always have the wherewithal and the wisdom to know everyone is capable of being that person, and you should never just solely think that they're absolved from it, because even anyone, we want to err on the side of wisdom and the betterment of understanding that what is wise and good, but everyone can have that moment where it's just they're lost and they do terrible things or mean things or vile things or treacherous things. And so long as I think that it doesn't cross a threshold to where someone is physically hurt or emotionally hurt, or even I would say just the tragedy isn't causing fissures in someone else. If we're sitting back and watching this person go through these things, you have to bear that in mind. And I guarantee you, if you allow it to run its course, and the whole time it's running its course, you're telling them, I want to be honest with you. I'm your friend. I would never deceive you. I think what you're doing is foolish, but I'm here and I'm your friend. And, I don't want to see you do this to yourself. Eventually they will come around. I have seen it more often than not, that they will remember the people that were honest with them and stuck with them, even despite the fact they were going through these times of absolute delusion. Yeah, I assumed you were putting your daughter to bed, so we were kind of running the paces, just stanza after stanza.
No, that's exactly what I wanted you to do. I appreciate that. I know you guys have it well in hand. But yeah, I think the last couple of stanzas that you went over they are in their way beautiful. They're also in their way sad. I think that, yeah. And I think you covered those really well.
Yeah, Mike said a wealthy man who gives away his fortune to a beautiful face online. These woes have plagued our ancestors too, but now the medium may be different. Sometimes the medium is far easier to fall into the deception of. And I think as a church and as a community, we should speak openly about these things to educate people and say, those are wrong. You shouldn't do that. People do it. People have done it for a very long time. But perhaps on the front end, if you hear it now, you'll catch yourself if you're ever falling into that fool's errand of letting your heart, be yanked off of course while, people are depending on the wisdom of you, and you're off trying to placate fissures in your soul that, end up hurting others around you. People that, aren't, your friends, your brothers, your kinsmen, people that you share oath with and have seen you through your worst and your best.
Some of those things, loneliness is kind of, a constant scourge of our people that we battle against, and it doesn't know a particular time. When settlements were few and far between, and some of the social opportunity wasn't nearly what it is today, that is kind of the backdrop for for this poem. You see some of the desperation and some of the foolishness that people make as far as mistakes go because they're lonely. We don't like to be lonely. Some people say that they do, but those people are very often saying that from a place of hurt and being jaded. But loneliness is a plague on our people, and I don't think that the lonely are particularly happy. And I think that that's a truth. To overcome loneliness, it talks about even wise men make fools of themselves, and that's one thing. In the Viking era, there's not a lot of women to go around everywhere all the time. None of this poem is, them sitting in halls being fed grapes by, herds of waiting beautiful women, for travelers and people who go far and wide trying to find somebody and are very lonely. In this day and age, we can get fooled into thinking that we're not, because we're surrounded by people. There are people all over. Most of us live in an urban setting and tons of folks everywhere. But the condition of our society and our social interaction has deteriorated, perhaps worse than ever. I think that we have people that are surrounded by other people, yet are lonelier than our very isolated ancestors. And I think it's, like I said, the wisdom is just as timely today as it was when it was written.
Yeah, and these stanzas really do reemphasize over and over again kind of the iteration of the point. I think that's from a poetic standpoint. But yeah, you can see that's why we kind of like we're moving fairly swiftly through them.
Yeah, this next I was going to say, this next section is, kind of a running story, and I don't know that we ought to stop at every stanza. I think maybe reading through 96 through 102 as one chunk might be the way to do that.
And this one's really interesting because it's based entirely off of a scant amount of, or at least alluding to a story that we no longer have, a poem or there's references to it in Hauksbach, but it doesn't glean much. And so all you can really gain is that there was once a story in which, this perhaps, held account. The wisdom is still there, but the context is unfortunate surviving. And that is in reference to Billing's daughter, but we'll get to that in 97. But ultimately 96 to 101 is more or less a kind of snippet in the story of the wooing of Billing's daughter. And so again, as from a poetic standpoint, and the Havamal seems to be three poems ultimately connected over time. And again, this part of the poem, or this section, which would be a standalone poem, is again referencing another poem which has not survived in time. 96. This found I myself when I sat in the reeds and long my love awaited, as my life the maiden wise I loved, yet her I never had. Billing's daughter I found on her bed in slumber bright as the sun. Empty appeared an earl's estate, without that form so fair. So let's just go with those two right off the bat. Lord Woden is speaking in relation to the wooing of Billing's daughter, and 96 to 101 is kind of that window. He's saying, especially waiting amongst the reeds, hiding out on the edges, like a young man sneaking off and waiting to catch this maiden and to woo her, but he didn't get her. It's clearly, yet her I never had. And so that's already out the gate telling you where this is going to go. Billing's daughter I found on her bed in slumber bright as the sun. Another interesting thing there, and I think we've referenced that before, is that the idea of a bright woman, her bright fair skin, her brightness, her shiningness, is a clear cultural context to the idea of beauty standards. And I think that our ancestors saw the ruddy woman, saw the swarthy woman, or the dingy as being a sign of lowliness, whereas when they saw the brightness, the cleanliness, the shiningness, the fairness of a woman as a sense of beauty. We see this in a lot of other cultures, and even cultures today where women will lighten their skin or lighten their hair. It's beauty standards, and that there's no difference here. And I think that some people have misconstrued, like, our ancestors didn't think this way, when clearly we have proof over and over again about their concepts of beauty being towards the fair-haired, the fair skin, the fair eyes. And I think people are trying to retroactively destroy that notion in order to, again, convolute things in their own direction. But Lord Odin comes again at 98. Odin again at evening come. If a woman thou wouldst win, evil it were if others than we should know of such a sin. Away I hastened, hoping for joy, and careless of counsel wise. Well I believed that soon I would win measureless joy with the maid. So discounting all wisdom, he again at evening trying to sneak about, again throwing caution and wisdom and following only his emotional desires. It would be reckoned as ill-wise or evil or unseemly if it was seen in others, but because he is so enamored, he doesn't see it in himself. And that's the part there. If a woman thou wouldst win, evil it were if others than we should know of such a sin. So again, he's simply stating, in anyone else, it would be a folly and a mockery, something that I would laugh and joke about. But here I am, trouncing about in the edges and in the reeds and hiding on the edges of windowsills and peeking about and being absolutely an unseemly little turd because I just want to be with this woman. All caution to the wind. So again, that I like that reference with the ideas that if you would picture it getting derision from you, if other people were doing it, perhaps you should reconsider doing what you're doing. Always kind of hold that context. That communal judgment can apply internally. It doesn't have to always be, are they judging me? It'd be, would I be judging someone else if I was acting, or if they were acting the way I'm acting right now? So he comes in verse 100. So came I next when the night it was. The warriors were all awake with burning lights and waving brands, torches. I learned my luckless way. So at this point, and let's take it from the context of our ancestral society, in which you have this young man lurking about the hall and hiding in the reeds and peeping through the windows and kind of hiding in the shadows to try to catch a moment, a glimpse, or a time to steal away with this woman. He's causing this kind of commotion, and he doesn't even care. He doesn't even worry about it. All he cares about is getting this woman. And meanwhile, he's fomenting a huge amount of hatred from her brothers, from her family, from the warriors of the hall. And so, he sneaks in there at night thinking, well, I couldn't do it during the evening and I couldn't do it during the early night, so I'm going to come in late in the night. And what he finds is torches and swords waiting for him. And the sad part about this is Billing's daughter. It's not quite know who Billingur is. Bitlingur is referred to as a dwarf in another, in Hauksbok. But that beyond that is, we know that dwarves and Jotnar are oftentimes or titled. But I think the wisdom is still there, is throwing caution to the wind and being an improprietous little cunning and mischievous snit, and thinking that you could just have your way without realizing you're weaving a lot of turmoil and discourse because you're not following proper etiquette. You're not following modesty. You're not following upfrontness and forthrightness. You're not going there and showing everyone that you are a good person and that you're an upstanding person and that you're a successful person and that you want to, court this person openly. Instead, he's, being the skulky kind of dastardly, like, and what does he get for it? The throng of warriors waiting with torches. The mob is ready with pitchforks. So, and that leaves us to 100. With burning lights and waving brands, I learned my luckless way. My time is my luck has run out. And then so each of these is kind of going through the spans of the night. And then at the morning then, in 101, at the morning then when I once more came and all were sleeping still, I found a dog in the fair one's place, bound upon the bed. So the painting of this again is that the situation is getting worse and worse and worse. And the desire and the hopelessness or the complete loss of wisdom is leading towards the inevitable ambush of the guard hound. The biting dog is waiting there because he was skulking towards the bed early in the morn. And this is what he got for his foolishness of trying to force it and trying to do it with impropriety, unseemliness. So we go to 102. Many a fair maid, if a man but tries them, false to a lover are found. That did I learn when I longed to gain with the wiles the maiden wise. Foul scorn was my mead from the crafty maid and not from the woman I won. So really this is again about weaving dissent, the idea of being enamored and desiring to do something and then attempting to do it with reckless abandon and without concern about what kind of impropriety it causes in the community. And then you end up being scorned. You end up being, talked about. And you find these people nowadays, it's like, I don't care if people talk about me or what have you. I'm going to do what I want. No, those people are very toxic. Those people will do things at a whim and notice without any care for the people around them, their loved ones, their kids, their family members, people that they've oathed to, and all of a sudden they just start acting a fool because they just don't care. They want what they want.
Yeah, it's a truism that I think many of us have seen, that love, infatuation, lust will drive people to completely throw all understandings of appropriate behavior to the wind and, sacrifice it all for, the opportunity to get their needs met. And it's a very, very powerful biological drive and instinct that leads people towards that. And I think this is, just as useful advice to young men faring out in the world today as it's always been. Just a moment before we get to the next one. The next stanza is kind of a transitional one. Alcy Miller donated $15 on Buy Me a Coffee. Says, hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the AFA. Thank you, Alcy. We appreciate it. Making good pace tonight. I think I'm looking for starting to get close to winding down. So I'm looking for good place for us to call it a night. And I think we've got a couple more in us left. If you would go and read 103 for folks, and then we'll go into the next story.
All right. So, though glad at home and merry with guests, a man shall be weary and wise, the sage and shrewd one, that his speech be fair. A fool is he named, who not can say, for such is the way of the witless. So this kind of turns away from the lovers and the lessons of love. And we will go back into that again, like you said, with the next story. And we do know that story. That story is being referenced again with the great Aryan concept of the attainment of the sacred liquid from the maiden. But we have this kind of respite break in which he speaks of the fact that, you know, when you in your home, you should be giving, you should be glad, you should be fair, and you should be wise, but you should also be weary and seek wisdom and give sparing speech, but be fair in your judgments, because a fool is one who knows not what to say, speaks out of turn, or holds no reins on his wits. And so I think this kind of more or less in 103 is emphasizing perhaps good mannerisms, noble qualities. But then it immediately shifts in 104 and 105 into another story. So 103 is interesting because it's kind of like a respite break between the story of the wooing of Bellinger's daughter and moving into the wooing of Gunnlöð. And so we're kind of right back into the love trials, but this is also kind of making another interesting point in relation to the deceit of a desiring heart.
So I think this is what we'll do. I think we'll read the story about winning the mead, and then from there we'll talk about that and its implications a bit, and that'll be where we stop for tonight.
Okay. And I think that would probably put us at stanza 111.
Yes.
Yeah, so 110.
Yeah, we'll read all the way through 110, and we'll start at 111 next time.
Or what if, yeah, okay, because it's on a page. Because what ends up happening is they have this excerpt here, and then we go into the story of Gunnlöð, and then we are about to enter the next poem that was brought in, and that, of course, is the sayings of Lod Fafnir. And, of course, most people are familiar with that because every stanza begins with, I give thee wisdom, I give thee counsel, Lod Fafnir, and then the counsel is given. That's an interesting way of kind of, I think the way we could sectional it was that we did like the rules and societal maxims, the maxims of love, and then looking at the story of Belling's daughter and Gunnlöð, and then Lodfafnir. So for anybody that's out there trying to compartmentalize the Hávamál for ease of reading, that might be a good way to look at it. So let's see. Let me get my place again. I'm sorry. Okay. So again, as we read these, bear in mind that these next stanzas, for those that are listening, are based around the story of the mead of poetry. Some of you might be familiar with the story, the slaying of the first storyteller of the gods, who was created amongst them and by them through the joining of their spittle in the story, in which they use the mastication to create the must that would become mead. But the mead is not just mead; it is a person, the first storyteller, Kvasir, and it is all attained again after he is slain, and his blood is turned into the great power of the mead of poetry, the spell power of Lord Woden, when he uses his wily and cunning ways to dig into a mountain and meets there the fair Gunnlöð, and he woos her to attain the mead, and then he turns into an eagle and flies away, and steals the mead to return it back to the gods. And there's a lot in that. And I think even if we did like a separate VNS based on that story, that would be very, very cool. But we're going to get into just a little peek of it here. So let's see, 104. I found the old giant. Now back have I fared. Small gain from silence I got. Fool, many a word, my will to get. I spoke in Suttung's hall. So now, to reference this point, Lord Woden is talking about entering into Suttung's hall, which a lot of people might not realize that he's talking about the mountain, because in the story, there's no point in which he actually goes into Suttung's hall. In actuality, he uses Suttung's brother to show him where the secret hall is hidden, which is a mountain. And he tricks the brother into pointing out which mountain it is in the range. And then he uses a special tool to gain access by turning into the form of a serpent, and he enters into the mountain. So Suttung's hall and the fair words that he's talking about, and the fact that silence gained him nothing, he had to speak fair words. He's talking about speaking to Gunnlöð, the maiden. And he says, the mouth of Rati. Rati is the auger that Suttung's brother used when he drove it into the mountain. And at this point, he knows that Lord Odin, who is going under the Heiti, or the pseudonym Bolverker, the worker of Baal. It's again part of the story. This is when the brother begins to realize, wait a minute, I might be making more trouble for myself than any of this is really worth. And so again, I would love to go over that story later. But so with the mouth of Rati, the auger, I made room for my passage, and space in the stone he gnawed. Above and below the giant's path lay. The giant's path, again, mountain ranges. This is a kenning. Speaking of, above and below the mountain range lay. So rashly I risked my head. So he's stating again that in the story he placed a moment by turning into the snake, and an attack was made against him when he did so, but he did it with the intent of getting through and into the mountain. Battle song. The Jotuness Gunnlöð, her name means song of battle. And in 106, he states, Gunnlöð gave on a golden stool a drink of the marvelous mead. A harsh reward did I let her have for her heroic heart and her spirit troubled sore. And so she has been, in the story, she's been punished by her father. She's been imprisoned in the mountain to watch over this mead that was attained and is of such great and visceral power that he has to hide it. And he places her as kind of the keeper of the sacred fluid of Kvasir's blood. And it's not a conquest that Odin takes by might, but he takes by speech and by power and by deception. And he's lamenting that he broke her heart in order to attain the mead. In 107, the well-earned beauty, well I enjoyed, little the wise man lacks, so Ordrior, the stirrer, now has up been brought to the midst of the men of earth. And this is to understand the mystery of Kvasir's blood and of the first storyteller turning to mead and the attainment of Lord Odin gaining it by drinking up the cauldron that is called Ordrior, or the stirrer of inspiration. He drinks the mead, and he also drinks the cauldron Bod and Son. So 3 cauldrons he drinks, fills his belly with the mead, and then flies above. And as he's being chased, the mead falls from his mouth and descends into the world of men, and inspires the magic and the power of the poetry of skalds. And that's what he's talking about here. He's like, so Ordrior now has been brought to the midst of the men of earth. I love this one too, because it does, you can clearly see where some of, say, like Tolkien's inspiration towards excerpts in Lord of the Rings, he clearly got them from the lore of his ancestors, our ancestors, and of the Havamal. And you can kind of see it laid out here. Let's see. 108. Hardly methinks would I home have come and left the giant's land had not Gunnloth helped me, the maiden good, whose arms about me had been. The day that followed, the Hrimthurser, or frost giants, the rhyme trolls, the Hrimthurser is what it's written in Old Norse. The frost giants came, some word of Hor to win, and into the hall of Hor of Bulwark they asked, where he back the midst of the gods, or had Suttung slayed him there. So this is an interesting excerpt because it doesn't present itself in the story. So now we're starting to see that the poet is alluding to perhaps either maybe a more involved poem, or at least excerpts that may have been lost, in which the Jotuns come to heaven and ask the gods where Lord Odin is, where the High One is. In Bello uses the word Hor, but in the Old Norse it's Halva, which again is the Havamal. It's the High One. They're asking where the Halva is, where Lord Odin is. Is he back amongst the gods? But they speak then of Bulwark. Or did Suttung actually kill him? Which in the story, we know he did not. In actuality, he is slain in turn by the gods as Lord Odin draws him closer to heaven, and they light the walls of Asgard on fire. 110. On his ring swore Odin, the oath methinks, who now his troth shall trust. Suttung's betrayal he sought with drink, and Gunnloth to grief he left. This is, again, I think, poetically speaking about Lord Odin as the cunning one, the tricking one, the one of that you cannot fully place your troth in, because his machinations are far more reaching. That the expense of Gunnloth, the expense of the winning that Suttung, because in the story Suttung gains the mead not through deception and not through cunning. He actually forcefully takes it from the murderous Dvergar who killed Kvasir. So they were treacherous. He was forthright, but then knew that the gods would be coming for it, so he tried to hide it. And Lord Odin used all of his cunning. He slayed the Jotun farmhands, and that's again alluding to that story. If you guys haven't read that story, you got to read it. It's amazing. Throwing the whetstone up, he tricks them all to spin around, and they end up slashing each other with their scythes. And then he does the work of all of them for the brother of Suttung, only on one condition. I'll do all the work of your field hands, but you got to tell me where your brother is hiding his mountain. Which mountain is the one that is his prized vault, his secret place, because that's where it's going to be. And so then he, sneaks in there, and then he woos Gunloth and takes the mead and then attains it. But again, there's this lament. The idea is that the bale that is worked is for the greater of the gain, and the ultimate property of the gods was Kvasir. He and has continued to be in his reiterations throughout time, as he has come back over and over and over again, property of the gods. And oftentimes great woe is wrought in the attaining of him again. And that's the cycle, the Aryan cycle of the gaining of the visceral liquid, whether it's the soma of the Vedics or whether it's the ambrosia of the Hellenics. Again, this is our story in relation to the attainment of the wisdom of the blood of the first storyteller.
And so this is put in here as a reference to a tale that the audience would have been familiar with, to put it in terms of, like the previous stanzas pointed out, the dishonesty of the interplay of love between men and women and the treachery involved in various things. And I think this displays that really well, but there's a lot more to this story and a lot of deeper meaning behind it. And we'll discuss it in a lot more detail when Svan and I go through the Skaldskaparsmal, I believe, is the poem that the rest of this is found in. But it's got a much more complete account, and in that it's much more treated. It's told for poetic use, but it gives much more of the high mythology of it that does become really important and has some profound things about it. And this story in particular, this is just kind of as a teaser, this is probably the bit of our lore that I think our founder, Steve McNallen, focuses on perhaps the most. He's really done a deep dive, harvesting meaning from it, and there's a lot to be found there, and we'll talk more about that when we go through the Skaldskaparsmal. It's a good place to stop. We covered a lot tonight. It lent itself for us to go through it a little bit faster than we did some other portions.
Yeah.
But I think this has been immensely valuable. We do have some questions, though, that we're going to get to from some folks. And I appreciate everybody who's donated, and I appreciate everybody who's asked questions and who continues to tune in and participate with this. We appreciate our audience and hope this is working out well for you guys and you're getting a lot out of it. The first one is from Michael from Njordshof. And could you speak a little on the Aetirs of the runes and why they're named after Freya, Hagel, and Tyr? Yeah. All right, Svan, I would like you to give them your explanation of that first.
Okay. I would honestly say they are not named after Freya or Frey or Heimdall or sometimes I've heard Heimdall and Tyr. Tyr, okay. Though.
Pause though. I wanted to check for a second because I didn't know whether there was some cool backfill.
Nope.
No, the reason you do that is because one's an F, one's a H, and one's a T.
Yes.
And that's all there is. That's all the depth on that. But it is a thing that they're separated into 3 sections like that. And Svan, do you have any thought on the reason for the separation into those 3 sections?
Well, so that's another interesting thing. When we look at the runes, the 2 oldest forms of rune futharks that we have is the Kelver stone, and then about 100 years later, there are 2 metal jewelry like brooches. They're called bracteates or bracteates, but it's a brooch. And these 2 things have the full futhark on them, and it is the Vatstena brooch that has small marks in between the 3. So the splitting of the futhark into 3 families actually comes from the Vadstena brecte or Vadstena brooch. The Kelverstone doesn't have it. It's a straight line. The word etur is Old Norse for family or tribe or grouping. And I think that runologists and people that have studied the runes in their multiple revivals saw those marks and saw the groupings and from the Vatstena brecte and just carried that forward into those groupings. The names, though, the first rune, of course, of the first 8, and again, it's merely a coincidence that there are 8 runes and the word eter sounds like the number 8. That is not, that's like a linguistic coincidence. That's not planned. A lot of people might, it's like recently over the weekend, somebody mentioned, we were talking about Niflheim, and someone was trying to think that it had some sort of connection to Nephilim in the Bible. And I was like, no, that's simply a coincidence of sounding. The word eter simply means family. And the Vatstena brecte did show a separation, an organization, but without any explanation as to why. So we don't know. But it does take the elder futhark of 24 and divide them into 3 separate groups. The first one being Feu. Feu, of course, starts with F, so a lot of people have placed Frey or Freya on that for some reason. I mean, with fair reason in the sense that there is a lot of connection to Lady Freya and gold, and Fehu is spoken of as the rune of wealth, but it is a stretch. So it would be amiss for me to say that there is some really cool story that would fit to that. And so you'll find a lot of modern rune authors have created these things for themselves. Does it have power, though? We've already talked about the idea of symbols and of patterns having power. I think that people that read these books should understand that if they help them classify and understand the futhark better, then perhaps in a way it has its own power. Is it ancestral based? Is there some note of wisdom in which it's explained that it is this way? No, it is a modern thing. I'm not stating that it doesn't have validity, but what it does is it seems to be of an organizational sense of certain authors from the 80s and 90s that kind of came up with it. And then naturally they followed the Hail rune with Heimdall. And again, perhaps it does have a certain sense of validity that Heimdall is said to have brought the runes to man, to the folk, to king, as he, the noblest Aryan of the folk. But is the Hail rune Heimdall's rune? No, it is not. And lastly, Tyr rune. The Tyr rune is one of the, there's only really 2 runes that specifically connect to the gods, and that is the rune Tyr and the rune Ing. Ansus has a broader scope. It can be focused very much so on Lord Odin, but it also has kind of connections to like with the Goths. Ansus means ancestor, not gods. So there's some other things there. So it just kind of, again, I think naturally fit. So if you really are interested in looking at the futharks, how they were originally written, I would look up the Kelver stone, Kylver, and the Vadstena, Vadstena, bracteate. It's a Latin word. It's very hard to spell. There's lots of vowels. But it is those two are where you're going to see the original and oldest forms of the Futharks that we have. I will say this much. The younger Futhark continues on with that tradition, but because it's 16 runes, it's not the same amount. Like there is 8, and 5, or no, it's I can't how they separate it differently, and then sometimes they flip it around so that the third et is first, and it goes backwards. And I've seen this because people using it for code during World War II, and there's some interesting history there. If you ever are interested in that, I would recommend looking into Dr. Stephen Flowers or Edward Thorson's book called Rune Lore. And that book doesn't really go into runes as a magical system or a divination system. It speaks about the runes in a historical sense. It talks about how they were organized in the Elder Futhark, the Younger Futhark. Talks about the development of the Anglo-Frisian Futhark and the revival of it in medieval times with the Germans, how it was used in knights' heraldry, how it was brought about in World War I and World War II, and how it was ultimately brought to in a revival in the 1960s and 70s with the Reformation of Asatru coming back. That's a really interesting book too. Kind of lays out the timelines and the epochs of runic inspiration. But the short answer, they don't correlate like that. Modern authors made that.
All right, and then our next our next little bit here is interesting, and I'm not sure what brought it up, but this is from over on Entropy. And this is what I referred to earlier from Sage of Sylvania. Low priority questions. At what point of resuscitation is it considered bringing someone back to life? During a code blue ? Is it as simple as getting someone's heart beating and breathing again? Is it more complex depending on the level of function that is retained upon resuscitation? Or is it impossible to truly bring someone back to life? I didn't want to interrupt, but I can't stay up the whole episode, so I'll catch it later. It's kind of at random, and I'm not sure if it was just something that had been on this person's mind or if it is a reference to something that was getting spoken about earlier.
I think it might be reference to the slain foe, the newly slain foe that we mentioned.
Okay. So do you have I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm actually a big fan in the studying of near-death experiences. I think all matters of spirituality fascinate me. I think that you might get some that are heavily contexted with an intention of, especially with Christianity, kind of again re-emphasizing their Judaic concept of like death and judgment and so on and so forth. But a lot of them are interesting in the relations of how they come about through, medical stories, doctors, people that have experienced it through maybe an accident. And they have, I think, far more a confirmation of the idea that we do encounter our ancestors, which I find really comforting and fascinating at the same time. I mean, our faith clearly builds on the idea that our ancestors are waiting for us beyond that veil, and that we are to return to them, and that their understanding of things here on the earth is a active understanding. It's not a passive or a past base. They are seeing the world now. Perhaps there are people that have passed on that may have a better understanding of things now than they did when they were living. But the resuscitational part, every story that I've ever studied on that was always like, again, there was kind of the out of body experience and perhaps the vision of ancestral people of significance. And more often than not, family. It's not usually a mentor or somebody that is not related. Though we do have a story of that case being, but perhaps mentors are reserved for people who aren't going to the other side. And that ancestors are present when it is dire, and that most likely you will pass through the veil. I don't know. Because I mean, I think the longest I ever heard of someone being out was like 3.5 minutes of complete brain inactivity. And that gets confused a lot with lack of oxygen. Some people have lack of oxygen. And they may still have brain activity, or they weren't able to measure it. And then other people, like, very rarely is it like there's like complete lack of brain activity, and then all of a sudden it starts up again. That is truly interesting stuff. But I'm not a medical guy. I don't know a lot about, saving the bodies. I know about making the bodies, not resuscitating the bodies. No, outside of my wheelhouse of training. But it just fascinates me. I think a lot of people getting in those stories, and I always find that the more, I guess, honestly spoken about, the ones that don't have, like, I was flying in the clouds and there was Jesus, or there was, like demons and so on and so forth. I take those with a grain of salt because I think they are substantiated by the orthodoxy of Christianity, whereas you find a lot more people just suddenly seeing themselves outside of themselves and then being approached or called to by their ancestors, and then suddenly being told, no, you know what, you're not coming here. And then they go back.
Yeah, I think I don't think either Svan or I can speak to the medical, like the biological indicators medically that really go to the meat of the question. And I want to answer that because I know that's what's getting asked, is kind of, at what point does that count? I mean, I think that there is a spectrum of approaching death that has always had a very profound shamanic value to people. There is a amount of your life is in peril, your biological systems are shutting down and failing, you are getting close to death, to where you start having, I guess, experiences that occupy, bits of things beyond the veil and bring back pieces of that. And that's one of the very, very interesting things. And I think that, to speak on something that Svan was saying a minute ago, it's hard to, when people describe things in a very specific Christian context or a very specific context that, I don't know, validates their pre-held belief system, it's hard to tell how much of that is their interpretation of it and how much is the raw experience. And I don't think that's always come about dishonest. We look for patterns and we use what we know. And I think that there are certain things that absolutely happen. And I think different people might use different terms to describe them. But it is encouraging to me and encouraging to my faith that so many of those interactions involve things that make sense to me. So many of those interactions describe being in the presence of or being met by ancestors, very often female ancestors, there to greet someone who's passed and to guide them home. And I think that is something that's a phenomenon that happens cross-culturally. I think that's a kind of a fact of how death works. And it's really interesting to hear so many of the commonalities in near-death experience. They're not all the same, and you can find folks that say they had one and there's absolutely nothing, or say they had one and describe it many different ways. But the commonalities are what I think are very, very interesting. And certainly going through ordeal to where you push your body beyond its normal state of living existence sends people back when they come back with insights that they didn't have before they ventured there, before they kind of pierced the veil in a way. And that's really fascinating to me. Not worthy of lots of discussion or whatever, but it makes me think of that movie Flatliners. I thought that was interesting. I hadn't thought about that movie.
Today is a good day to die.
But yeah,
best intro to a movie. Sorry.
No, it was cool in a lot of ways, and the idea of going to that place to bring back knowledge or bring back wisdom is as old as people. And sometimes it happens through accident and circumstance. And like I mentioned earlier, there are shamanic practitioners and folks that deliberately get as close as they can to that for spiritual purposes. But there's something profoundly informative and metaphysical in that moment where life and death meet. And so I guess to answer the question or get as close to it as we can, someone, I one of the questions in that, it was a series of kind of questions and thoughts on it, but is it impossible to truly bring someone back to life? I mean, no, we've seen people that are clinically dead in lots of different ways come back, be resuscitated, and retain life. And when I say that, I don't just mean biological function of heart and lungs. I mean cognitive ability, to where it's the same person that left. There's people that have been resuscitated and then never regained the faculties that we really count for full coming back. But we also have a lot of people that come back and have very interesting stories to tell. We have another question over in the chat room. Do you believe in reincarnation? So that's something that we've talked about on the show before. First, I do not think that full one-for-one soul reincarnation is how it works usually. I think there are rare exceptions to where that can happen due to a special spiritual practice or the will of the gods for a particular purpose. But I think more often than not, we talk about our soul being a complex of many different parts for a convenience of 9 parts. Some of those things continue on in your family line and can be passed down. Some elements of memory, elements of your luck, pieces of Haminya. But your you-ness, not so much. You can pass down memories, but one of the things that's kind of a fundamental truth, new people are getting, the numbers don't add up for it to be a one-for-one soul reincarnation thing. It doesn't add up or work nearly that cleanly. And also, we venerate our ancestors, we worship our ancestors, and we communicate with them through the veil. The integral parts of the soul of your grandfather can't simultaneously be existent in your son and existent with your ancestors or with the gods in the land of the dead. It doesn't quite work like that. Elements of his memory and his luck certainly can. And I think that's what we try to pass on due to, how we do naming rights and other things. And I think that is a process. Now, in a very rare circumstance, I think that it is certainly possible for a soul to come completely back into a person through miraculous means, or because it's a special will of the gods, or in a special case of a special hero. And I think that's a thing, and I don't preclude that possibility, but I don't think that's the standard practice of how that works. Svan, do you have anything you want to add on that?
No, I think you hit it well, because you're speaking about the machinations of our ancestors and their unique, let's say, corner of the cycle, or actually that wouldn't work because it's a circle and there are no corners. Let's say their side of the cycle, because the element that we have is the souls of the living, the adjudication and domain of the gods, and I guess what would be the ancestral ability to mete out pieces of the folk soul, like you were saying, like memories and inclinations and luck and sections. And we know that the idea of our mythos tells of a cycle. When we see Yggdrasil in heaven springing forth dew from its leaves, and those leaves, the dew drips down into the well of Erd. This is the moment in which I think life and soul life, and the power of the soul or souls, is transferring through the heavenly realm from the leaf of Yggdrasil to the well. And in that time, a lot can happen. I think that the gods have the ability to allocate souls to, like catching drips and dewdrops from the leaves. They can hold those souls in the upper realm. I think that elevation, that attainment of exaltation from the folk soul to the gods happens in this state. But some of those souls, or pieces of those souls, go into the well of Erd, and they enter into the world of weird, the source of weird being the well of Erd. And that is allocated by the gods in their dominion of whether that perhaps is the Disir, the Alvar, or pieces of and the boons of your ancestors being given to your bloodline. The worst thing that could ever happen is that your bloodline is forgotten about by your ancestors, or no longer, your Haminya turned off. So the boon of gaining the memory and the soul might of great ancestral souls, whether pieces, parts, memories, or in some very rare cases, perhaps a whole, we don't know. And then we live, and the gods mark us for glory and mark our deeds. And then we are again taken in the process where all things go into the well of memory. Everything breaks down and descends into that place away from time, away from the heavenly upper realm. And that's where the folk soul is. So that cycle continues again, because there is a root that is in that lower realm, and Nidhogg is desperately trying to break it in order to stop the gods from having the ability to bring those soul might, that the soul pieces back, so that they could cultivate stronger and more glorious souls, so that they could keep them and bolster their power. I think that this is the ultimate cycle that's being portrayed in the mythos. But when we talk about the percentages of soul and that we don't know, and I think I think the refreshing point of it is our honesty in saying, like, that we don't know the exact ratios, the exact measurements and ingredients. We can kind of only see in the mythos of our stories the cyclical nature and the kind of circulatory system that Yggdrasil plays in the upper world, middle world, and lower world, that is uniquely Aryan and unique to the Teutonic Aryans specifically. So in that mythos, we kind of more or less are feeling out a common sense observation of the returning of the components of the soul, the exaltation of a soul from the folk soul up to the gods. And, we believe that you can be exalted. You can be pulled up from the middle, and you can be pulled up from the lower, because the gods have the ability to connect. All of those are connected through Yggdrasil.
So we've got another question that comes up on this topic of the afterlife. What is the general opinion of the AFA on where the soul goes after death? Many believe they are destined for Valhalla, but have never heaved a sword. So the doctrine of the AFA is that, a couple of things. First, the standard answer is you go to the halls of your ancestors. I think that's the answer for most people in general. But there are a couple of other possible things, one of which, in a very bad circumstance, if you are judged by your ancestors and our gods to be completely and totally without redemption or redeeming value, that's where we talk about people going to the strand and being dripped venom upon and dissolved. They dissolve so their component parts and pieces and energy can go back into the well to be used for parts to make other people, because their soul is that level of disgraceful or dishonorable or beyond redemption. But that's that's the worst of the worst. Most people go and commune with their ancestors. People that have done great things that the gods find worthy can also elevate them and bring them into a state of being that's higher than they are. We talk about that being ascension. People can ascend, and that's where you get the stories of people going to the halls of the gods. That's where you get the idea of folks going to Valhalla in that very, very specific circumstance that's talked about. But the other thing, I think that there's always a tendency to be overly literal with our lore. And I don't think that needs to be the case. When we have our myths about Valhalla spoken about, it's in a very specific time and place to where battlefield death was a normal occurrence of life. And to talk about those who have overcome themselves and become something more through feats on the battlefield is a very particular way of earning ascension to something greater than you are. And it talks about the possibility in that circumstance of going to either Freya's hall or to Odin's hall. But the point that I think we've made a number of times is there's many different paths to ascension. I think it's presumptuous and improper for any of us to make the assumption that we are going to the halls of one of our gods. I think we have a place amongst our ancestors, but I think it's entirely up to our gods who they welcome into their halls and who they don't. And because we read a fragment of ancient lore doesn't entitle us to say who gets to go in Odin's Hall and who doesn't. And I think to do that would be impious. But certainly that is the historical example we've seen. But there's also points of lore to where people who did not die on the battlefield themselves, but were great heroes and great personages, were welcomed into Valhalla in the lore that had not died on the battlefield. Just the logic of like, you have to actually, like, if you were the greatest warrior ever of all time and nobody can kill you, so you don't happen to die on the battlefield, being like, nope, don't want that guy. But instead, random guy that happens to die on the battlefield, that guy makes it, is, I think that's stretching the particulars of the lore far too much. I think it speaks of the truth of our gods welcoming mighty heroes into their halls, great people and people who have ascended and become more than they once were. I think that is a truth that it speaks to. And I also think that one of the most obvious and visceral ways of someone transcending the human experience is through glorious deeds on the battlefield. Like I was saying with, one of these last questions, I think in the proving ground where life and death meet, that's where a lot of really profound metaphysical things happen. And this is certainly one of those. So continuing on this theme, do you think there could be more to life after death? Could things like ghosts or spirits of the dead people, or spirits be dead people, for example? Svan, I'll let you take this one.
Okay. Yes, we did talk about this during the VNS about the soul, but we, reiterating it or even giving small snippets in return can help because, people might have missed certain episodes or what have you. One thing that we talked about was the reason why we believe that the soul components are important is because we see them as these components in some parts leave, like the body, and that there are other parts that remain, sometimes attached in a way. The hammer is the spiritual body that kind of resides under the flesh. And a lot of times the hammer imprints remember, the middle world is the world of time, the world of weird, the world of all things being woven in action and energy, whether it's sound, light, physicality, like the actual physics of the middle world playing out. And one of the things that I think a lot of goes towards perhaps say ghosts or the memories of on battlefields and things are actually components of the soul remaining, in specifics the hammer. When you see or hear the sounds of soldiers marching or of people lamenting in a place of great sorrow or of great, oftentimes, unfortunately, we don't hear a lot about these things happening in places of great joy. But I think that sometimes they are there as well. When we enter places that are filled with a great sense of joy, that is the hammer of people from the past with that part of their soul still remaining in the middle world. But we do know that the soul receives a great amount of the components, the ek, the huger, or the mind, and the mini, the memory, falls into the soul, and the workhorse of the soul, the part of the soul that kind of is the legs of the soul beyond our physical body, is the filkia. There are some people that try to say that the filkia is some sort of lawyer, that when we die, we go to a place and our filkia is like a lawyer and the gods are like judging us. But our lore speaks of a very different way that goes about, that the gods actually gather to council in heaven and they witness our deeds as we live. Our gods see us as living beings that commit to acting in the world and watching us and marking us for glory or for doom, oftentimes based off of our deeds. Sometimes they can transcend that. The Val Father, the choosing Father, can send his carriers of the chosen to grab the chosen and elevate them up into the hall of the chosen. And again, this is all referencing to his choosing, not necessarily just you caught a piece of shrapnel and therefore you're in, you got the golden ticket. It's not that. I think Lord Vodun is the Val Father. He's the choosing Father. And the gods are ultimately trying to cultivate soul might within the folk. And that soul might, its ending point is not with the ancestors, but with the gods. And that processes is always kind of alluded to. And so the cycle of the folk soul and having its components brought through the circulatory system of Yggdrasil and the 3 levels is a part of that process. Hence the reason why Nidholger is trying to destroy the 3rd root. But death is a dissipation from time. Death is a breaking apart of the things that make things material, the middle world. So from the gods, we have order, cosmic order, we have time, we have the placement and the ordering of all things. It plays out in the middle and then it dissipates away from time, is kind of, again, brought to its component pieces and then meted out back up into the world of the upper, with Yggdrasil being the dispensatory system or the circulatory system of this kind of flowing power. And we see that our ancestors have the ability to deny us access to the folk soul. And that is another great thing. So we have a duality of moral compunction. One, we want the gods to witness our deeds and bless us for good deeds and not doom us for being, falling short of being what we should be, the noble soul. But on top of that, we should also bring honor and pride to our ancestors and they should want us to come back. And if they do deny us, then yes, we do end up falling off the cycle. And if we go off that cycle, we become something else. And a lot of people do focus on that. And I think that is good that we have it. It's not morally ambiguous. If you fall short of the ancestors and the gods, it is not a good situation to be in. You want to be able to connect with ancestors. You want to be in that cycle system so that generations and generations can culminate that soul power for the gods to ultimately bolster with. And it doesn't happen through just, very rarely it can happen in one life. And it has, and we've spoken about it, but it doesn't often. Oftentimes it is a layered process in which the components of the individual soul are mixed with the total soul, and the total soul meets out those pieces again in order to be honed and sharpened and to grow in strength.
And so on the subject of ghosts, there are a number of different things that when we start talking about things beyond the realm of human understanding and human experience, things get sloppy because we just have glimpses and we have fragments. But there's a lot of things to that. There's the one where sometimes you'll hear stories of ghosts where it's just images of the same people going through the same motions over and over. You hear that a lot with battlefield ghosts. Like that's a number of accounts at Gettysburg talk about, spectral soldiers going through the same motions every single day for, 150 years now. That's very much, in a way, an after image, like Svan talked about, that piece of the soul that's left an imprintation there that is, is permanently imbued in that spot because of the intensity of event. There's also, and then there's ghosts that interact. Very often you hear that in, scary and unfortunate circumstances where there's someone who, I don't know if they are not welcomed by their family and are lost or what that situation is, but I think that exists, certainly for a time. And there's other times that you have positive, interaction that people with second sight notice. They'll notice, they may tell you about one of your loved ones that they see in your presence that, follows you around sometimes, or, checks in on you. We believe in that. We certainly believe, we worship our ancestors and believe that they look on and interact with us in our lives and can bless us and interact with us. We certainly believe that about our Deseer, and we honor them as the women that look on and take care of us from beyond the veil. And it's funny, if you haven't experienced it or been around people that you take seriously that talk about having that second sight, because most people who say they do are just lunatics and they're lying to you. But then there's some that aren't. And the ones that aren't, it's very fascinating. But yeah, ghosts are absolutely a real thing. And there's an entire spectrum there of what exactly that means and what category that falls into, from the very tragic to the beautiful and amazing, when one of your ancestors is coming to check on you and do you a kindness or look after your children. So there's a whole spectrum there. But we're going to call it good for tonight, guys. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I know that I am. I look forward to doing this each week with Svan. People seem to really like us going through the lore. No telling how many more episodes we've got on the Hávamál, but as many as it takes. I think that's always a good use of our time. Yeah, if you can, and we'll talk to you a couple of times until then, but be thinking about making plans to go to Ostara at Thorshof. It's going to be amazing, and I want to share it with you. So if you can, that would be fantastic. I will see you guys next week. Hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the AFA, and remember, victory never sleeps.
Good night, everyone.